Good afternoon. My name is Chris Leak. I am Chair of the City County Planning Board. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the December 8th meeting. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast live on TV 13 and will be rebroadcast at 10 a.m. Friday morning and again at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Our first order of business today will be the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one is signed up to speak in opposition. For all public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There will be no rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless a planning board member asks them a question. For general use district zoning requests, the planning board must consider the full range of uses allowed in the zoning district being requested. The petitioner may not refer to a specific use for the property. For special use district zoning requests, however, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. Items under Section B of the agenda will require final action by the appropriate elected body, either the city council or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today by the planning board concerning these items are recommendations that will be considered by the elected bodies during their review of the request. Before addressing the planning board, we will need your name, address, and zip code for the record. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the November 10th public hearing. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Second by Mr. Stillman. Any further discussion? All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye, oppose the same sign. That is unanimous. Now I'm going to call on Mr. Brian Wilson to review the consent agenda.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For tonight's consent agenda, we'll begin with this request for item B1. That's case W3547. The petitioner has withdrawn this case and no longer under consideration. There are additional 3 items that have received automatic continuance requests to your January 12th meeting. Those are items B2, W3550, item B7, W3554, and item C1, that's subdivision number 2022-140. Next item on the agenda is actually going to be a public hearing, so we'll move on to the next item, which is item B4. Item B4 is case W3551. Petitioner is Longleaf Properties, LLC. Petitioner is requesting a rezoning from an RS9 and RM18S district to an RM18 general use district. This is a 4.56 acre site located on the north side of Bethabara Road across from Old Town Road. So to provide a little more context, this is the site highlighted here in yellow. I believe in your agenda packet there may have been either this map or another map with a related case across from railroad tracks that highlighted both sites. This is the correct map, and just wanted to ensure that you understand what's under consideration here. The site is completely undeveloped and heavily wooded and is bounded on both sides by existing apartments. And of course, you have the North Point Shopping Center further to the east. As a reminder, this is the area plan land use recommendation, which does recommend medium density residential uses, 8 to 18 units per acre. The rezoning is consistent with Legacy 2030 in the area plan, and staff recommends approval of this request.
Are there any, are there any questions for staff?
I have plenty to say about it, but I'll wait until we get a motion on the floor.
All right. Is anyone here opposed to this opposition? No one has signed up. Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
We have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion?
Yes. There are some new members on the board, but some of us have been on here for a while, realize that the placement of this is a critical place in Winston-Salem. It has cost the city tens of thousands of dollars in this area. It's demanded the work of our first responders to deal with the issues in this area. And it has been critical both on that side of Menorah's Creek and the other side of Menorah's Creek. In fact, when we were developing Fairlawn, there were extensive discussions about stormwater drainage and the needs for that to keep this from overloading. So I've been out to the site a couple of times, so my remarks here are both related to this case and the case on Indiana Avenue. So we've got two potential development cases occurring in a very, very sensitive spot that's had some real damage. So Mark, could I get you to play clip one on as part of that to sort of talk about that? So this morning, this is the area here. I just went out to take a look. The sign is over on the left at the far where Old Town Drive comes into Bethabara. And would you go over to video 2? This is the flooding that occurred in 2018 at Bethabara. In fact, we probably should have the HRC in here talking about the danger of what's going on there to Bethabara in that area because of the flooding. Go to video 1. This is 2020 in November of the year, and very bad flood. In 2020, it flooded a little bit less in February, and then came back and flooded in that November 14th of that time. Would you play clip? Let's see. There's a picture, 1 or 2. Let's see. Yeah. So this is our fire department, and then there's another picture right after this somewhere. Our fire department had to go in and actually get people out. This apartment complex is 8 feet on the left side of where I showed you that road at the beginning. So my point with this in the next case is that this area, Menorah's Creek, unless planning has some words that this has been solved beyond what I've heard from the neighbors down there, is absolutely critical that it not get another drop of stormwater to make it any worse. I mean, it was listed in 2017 by our city as being one of the #1 spots for flooding in our city. So I guess the question is, as we vote on this, how can we either ensure that not another drop of stormwater goes into this area and causes disasters like this, because they're going to happen. They're happening, 3 times in the last 4 years? Or do we hold on to development until we get some reassurance from the city and others that have responsibility that this kind of flooding has been somehow relieved by other systems? Otherwise, we're going to lose Bethabara. We're going to lose what we have down there in these apartments. These apartments are still there, and they're 8 feet above, but are still being flooded by this area. So I really encourage people to either continue this case until we hear from the city about how this can be controlled. I checked earlier with the staff to see if we could put a condition on this, that somehow a higher standard of stormwater management be applied in this case, but I was told that we couldn't do it on a general use. So I'm a little bit stuck, but I feel very strongly that we need to either continue this or to deny it until we've heard back from the developer on a way that they're going to keep just another drop of water from going into that mess.
Did you get, excuse me, did you get copied on the emails from
I
Mr.
did.
Fogarty and?
Yeah, and if you notice on the other case, it's only a 25-year stormwater.
Right, but in both of the cases, he indicated his opinion. I know he's working with a hypothetical, and that's always a real challenge.
Well, and I asked for him to be here today, but.
Yeah, but he was indicating that he saw no benefit. At least that's what I got from the emails of applying a 50-year storm standard.
Yeah, I know, it needs to be more like 100.
Or 1,000.
Well, I mean, again, you know,
Chris, hold on, I'm sorry, Ms. Smith.
I was going to say, the information you showed, and a lot of us are aware of that, and you feel compassion for the people that are being evacuated. But this one, the parcels we're looking at today, is part of a huge watershed. So I don't think you can make a decision to restrict, I didn't calculate the percentage of area that these properties are out of that huge watershed, but I agree with the other assessment in looking at that would not control the issue. That's the problem. And the relatively small amount of land area compared to the overall watershed would, I think, be very small. So I think that was a scientifically, rational basis for those comments for that. So I personally, the city would have to be involved in some larger scale watershed study. I mean, other cities will do that. Raleigh's doing that in a lot of theirs right now, before we would be in a position to have a basis for saying yes or no. We're not going to rezone anything else in this area because here's the impact. But I think with what they're proposing, I would not recommend denying it based on some of those conditions or continuing it.
Yeah, also, a developer's not going to want their development to flood. It's a bad business model. So if there's going to be, we can see that there's going to be more stormwater management on site. I think to control like one drop of stormwater, like that's an impossible, like you put a cement block down that increases stormwater on that site. So I just think that that's just an unfair burden on development of the city and the opportunity to provide housing in our city.
Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, again, according to Joe Fogarty, and again, I've heard this over, in lots of different situations. Sometimes if you design to a higher level storm and that means you're discharging at a later time, it actually could further exacerbate the problem because you are releasing more water into the site at a later time. After the slug of water from upstream comes down, it could actually make it worse. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, obviously it's up to this board and ultimately the city council as far as the rezoning goes, but there are property rights associated with this site. And again, under existing RS9 zoning, there is no maximum impervious surface limit for RS9 zoning. RM18 has a cap of 18%. Regardless of what would happen, whether it's rezoned or not, something can be done here, and it would have to be done in compliance with the UDO and the city code. And that means, if it triggers or trips the stormwater management requirements, it would have to meet those minimums. And again, according to the engineer who reviews this, in his opinion, it would be better not to design to a higher year storm because you might actually be making the problem worse. I just want to say that's what the email says. And again, I'm not a stormwater expert myself. I'm just, again, whenever Ms. Highsmith had sent her email and I knew that George had called staff, I reached out to Joe to make sure that he could provide us with some insight as to these two sites and what his professional opinion would be.
What did you say the impervious limit was on the RM18?
80%.
80%.
And there is no cap, there is no maximum
Right.
in single family. If you're on a watershed, there is, but this isn't a water supply watershed, so there
Thank
would
you.
not be a cap.
This would also be, need stormwater review at the time of development as well, right?
Correct. And again, if this were rezoned to RM18, it would more than likely require a planning board review. I don't really think there's any way that they would be able to do this design in a manner that would, all the buildings would front onto an existing public street. So that would necessitate a planning board review. And as part of that, one of the things, again, that if the planning board wanted to impose conditions, again, I think it should be done in conjunction with the recommendation of the engineers, but stormwater management plans are something that can be conditioned by the planning board as part of their review and approval, even if it doesn't go to city council. So, I mean, again, on that site plan. So if this were to get rezoned and a site plan did come through for review and approval, and at that point, based on the plan submitted, that the stormwater feels like, okay, based on what they're doing here, we think there does need to be more stringent standards, the planning board could impose that as a condition of approval.
And I was just going to add, so I grew up pretty close to here, so I'm quite familiar with the flooding on Bethabara. Something that came to mind is that, as you just mentioned, moving forward with any redevelopment on the site would likely trigger new analysis and stormwater plans. And so I think it could be, I don't think it's fair to limit or prohibit any development in the whole watershed at this moment, considering we hadn't made that decision, in general. But the future development would likely be better off, given analysis and site plan and runoff and all that analysis than it probably is now. And so moving forward, hopefully will lead to better water flow in the area.
You guys are real optimistic. And the only reason the room isn't full here is because it's low rent apartments that people don't get a letter about this to. And so what we're dealing with here are people that don't even know that this meeting is happening, whose lives are being affected every other year by this. That's what I hoped planning was going to do, is to plan so we wouldn't have these problems.
As a point of clarification, Chris, if I heard you correctly, you said that it's most likely, if the property were rezoned, that it would have to come back before us for review and approval of the site plan. Can you describe any instance in which it would not?
Off the top of my head, I mean, there are some uses in RM18, like if someone were to come in and do a neighborhood scale church, which is allowed in RM18, I don't know why you would rezone it from RS9 to RM18 to do that, but again, a neighborhood scale church would not require a planning board review. It would have to go through the proper permitting process, one of which would be going through stormwater. But again, it would not come back to this group. If they did let's just say for some reason they got this rezoned to RM18 and again wanted to do a minor subdivision and do, 3 or 4 single family lots, which again, I don't know why you would do that if you're rezoning to RM18, but that wouldn't come to this. But any subdivision, any type of multifamily development would come back through either as a subdivision or a planning board review, both of which are considered site plan reviews in the context of the planning board and therefore are subject to conditions that can be imposed upon.
And even without our review, upon the submittal of a site plan, be it for our review or not, that's when the trigger occurs for the analysis of this issue, specific to that site plan.
Correct. And again, let's play out the string and say it did get rezoned to RM18 and for some reason they did do a neighborhood scale church. Mm-hmm. And that was a staff level approval. And let's say that, based on the 5 acres that they're under the 24% impervious surface, mm-hmm. they would be exempt from stormwater because that's what happens. You have to have over 24% impervious surface for stormwater to be triggered.
Okay.
But let's say they did a neighborhood scale church and it was 40% impervious, then they would be subject to the stormwater restrictions of the city code. So again, there are lots of variations and permutations and things that could happen. But again, logically, if you're going to rezone to RM18, I would assume they're going to be, eventually someone would be bringing through a multifamily project that would be subject to a planning board review that would come back to this board.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right, any additional comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just note that, of course, we are on the motion that's on the floor currently is for in conformance with the comprehensive plan.
Correct. We do have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose the same sign. That's one denial.
Mr. Chairman, I further move that the planning board recommend approval of W3551.
All those in favor, sign, oh, sorry, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee, motion by Mr. Lamb. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose the same sign.
All right, Mr. Chairman, your next item on the consent agenda is item B5. This is case W3552. Petitioner is Second Star Development Incorporated. Petitioners request a rezoning from NO-S to NO-S to add some uses, including child daycare center. It's a 0.9 acre site located on the north side of Polo Road, west of Green Valley Road. You can see on the east and western sides of the site, those properties are already zoned neighborhood office. There's an existing single-family subdivision to the rear. And of course, Robin Hood Road's a little bit further to the west with those commercial uses there at that activity center. The site will reutilize this is the proposed site plan. The petitioner is proposing to reutilize an existing structure in the south side of the property. They're on the frontage with Polo Road. That's a residential and character building for the daycare use. All internal drives and parking are already existing, and they propose to reuse those as one-way entrance and one-way exits with new designation of 3 parking areas for loading and unloading spaces. In the northwestern portion of the site, highlighted in green, that was the proposed play area. They're proposing to cut down some undergrowth there and provide a play area that's fenced and meets UDO requirements. There is one uninhabited structure in the rear. They're not proposing to do anything that with relation to the use at this time. The site plan does meet UDO requirements, and staff does recommend approval of this request. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, questions for staff?
This is a childcare, so that we hope there's going to be plenty of laughter and playing. The buffers that are required for the residential areas,
They are shown.
okay, and how much are they?
It should be a type 1 buffer yard, 15 foot.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for staff? No one has signed up in opposition. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. What is the motion of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I further move the planning board recommend approval of W3552.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose it, same sign. That is unanimous.
If I may, I would just like to add that I think this is a great example of how you can mix neighborhood services into neighborhoods and both win.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
All right, the next item on the consent agenda is item B6. It's case number W3553. Petitioner is Legacy Properties LLC. They're requesting a rezoning from an RM18S district to an RM18S district to add multifamily uses. This was previously only zoned as a life care community. This is a 10.23 acre site located on the south side of Indiana Avenue, across from the intersection with Appomattox Drive that you can see right here. The site is adjacent to existing multifamily uses. Again, you did just hear a case across the railroad tracks to the south here, additional multifamily buildings, apartments at these two locations. To the north side, there is an existing single-family subdivision, and some, of course, you're right next to the North Point Shopping Center further to the east. And this is the 2018 aerial showing the site is undeveloped and heavily wooded. Again, you can see the built environment there with multiple apartments on both the east and south side across from the railroad tracks. This is the proposed site plan. They are proposing a single access point with improvements along Indiana Avenue to provide adequate turning movements into the site. They're proposing 6 apartment buildings in total. 3 of those will be 3 stories. Those are highlighted in blue there for you. And then the remaining 3 will be 4-story units. It's 180 apartment units total with a proposed density of 17.59 units per acre. They're also proposing 1 clubhouse and pool with internal common open space and, highlighted in green. Just a reminder, they are proposing a built-upon area of 48.6%, thus triggering requirements for stormwater. They're showing the 2 stormwater devices, one in the southeastern portion of the site and one in the northwestern portion of the site, just a little bit past that intersection with Appomattox. They are proposing internal private sewer connections that will tie into the available public sewer along Indiana Avenue. And here are the proposed elevations for they're basically 2 different building types. Just to point out, staff worked with the developer in providing additional buffering along the frontage with Indiana. Staff at the time had additional concerns about providing a good streetscape compatibility with that single-family neighborhood. So we have revised that condition that a type 1 buffer yard to be planted along the frontage of Indiana Avenue until its intersection with Appomattox Drive. That will fully screen the parking areas and buildings. And then the remainder of the site frontage is volunteered by the petitioner that will be planted with 2 deciduous trees per 100 feet. The site plan does meet UDO requirements. Staff does recommend approval of this request as it meets the recommendations of the area plan and Legacy 23. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
I only have one. Was there any consideration to have one more access point on Indiana? This is a lot of, this is what I do, is multifamily. This is a lot of units to come in and out, or at least extend that island to create a true division all the way to the road. It seems really tight, that entrance. That's my...
So I'll give you my opinion, and again, taking in mind that I'm not a traffic engineer, but that part of Indiana, my understanding is that there's a pretty high flow, not a high flow of traffic. The traffic volume is fairly low, but the people who go through there tend to exceed the speed limit. Sure. And it going to the west, it actually goes down by quite a significant grade. Topo. So I think that there might be sight distance issues and possible traffic concerns. That's probably why they only showed the 1 entrance, in addition to being able to limit access points for those as their private streets.
Ms. McRae, we do have Jeff Fansler from DOT if you wish for...
I don't think it's more of a... it's a lot of units to have just 1 entry point in and out. It's more of a public safety issue, getting fire trucks in and out, access point, if there is something that happens on those back buildings, I don't know. I get it, but it just didn't know if there was a way to encourage an additional one or on
And, again, it's kind of funny whenever you look at things, and, again, I'm not arguing, and again, I think it's fine, but like the neighbors across the street are actually happy it's only one access versus two. That was one of the things that they were actually happy about in some of their correspondence. I believe that was included in your packet. So, obviously, whenever you're not dealing with sprinkler buildings, there is a limit to the number that you can have on a single access, but since all these buildings will be sprinklered because they're multifamily, and again, it doesn't address the heart attack situation if for some reason the driveway was blocked, but
It's okay, yep.
Brian, where does this, the water and everything drain to in this site here?
I'll probably end up deferring to the developer. I'd be more than happy to answer the question. My understanding is that the southeastern pond will drain generally southeast. I don't know its ultimate drainage point at this time since it's just conceptual, and it would be up to the developer to provide a engineered stormwater plan for final review to make sure that the pre and post impacts are
But we haven't
managed.
seen any pumping put in there to run it anywhere other than with the topography, have we?
according to the email again that was
Yeah.
sent out, Joe cannot find the pipe that goes under the railroad track, but essentially, both of the stormwater management devices will outlet and will follow the ditch between the subject property and the railroad track, and will eventually get into Monarchus Creek where the existing crossing under the railroad track is, but it will not discharge. It won't change the flow of water. The existing pattern of flow, which is to the, in this case, northwest, will continue. It's going to be at this point at the 25, it will discharge at using the 25-year standard.
Yeah, I'm wondering whose property will be affected by it. But again, it sounds like it's going into Monarchus Creek, so all my concerns about the other property are even higher with this, and I would like to look at least a 50-year storm on something like this to even think about it.
The only thing I wanted to bring up for anyone here tonight that has read the staff report, it indicated that there were 6 3-story buildings rather than 3 6s and 3 4 to 5s. So I want to thank you for making that correction and add that as a clarification. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Steeland.
Any other questions for staff? All right, no one has signed up in opposition to this case. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I further move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3553.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, with the revised
additional-
condition.
Yeah, revised condition.
motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Are those opposed?
No.
One.
All right, Mr. Chairman, moving on to your next item on the consent agenda, we have case W3555, which will actually be a public hearing item. Move along. And item B9 will also be a public hearing item. We'll hear a presentation momentarily. Your next case is item B10, that's case F1625. Petitioner is Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Board of Education. They're requesting a rezoning request from the RS9 zoning district to the IP district as a general use request. This is a 45.19 acre site located on the east side of Fraternity Church Road, south of South Stratford Road. As you can see, the site already contains Clements Middle School on the northern campus and Water Elementary in the southern campus. It is largely surrounded by single-family zoning. However, there is a mixture of light industrial and other commercial uses to the south and to the north. It's our understanding the petitioner, just to preface this, that the petitioner is requesting the rezoning to install an electronic message board sign. I believe the petitioner is here, a representative. My assumption is that's going to be located approximately in the green area here. The request is consistent with the area plan recommendations and Legacy 2030, and staff recommends approval of this rezoning request.
Any questions for staff? All right, no one has signed up in opposition. Is anyone opposed to this case? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same sign.
I'm opposing that as it is part of a comprehensive plan because it wasn't industrial as part of the legacy here.
All right. One opposition.
Mr. Chairman, I further move the planning board recommend approval of F 1625.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, your next item is a preliminary subdivision, item C2. So subdivision case number 2022-141, named the Jason Robbins subdivision. This is a 10-lot subdivision in an RS9 zoning district. Contains 3.86 acres, and it's located on the south side of Jason Lane, west of Robbins. See on the site plan, this again proposes 10 single-family zoned lots with a new public street ending in a cul-de-sac. Given the site location, there were not other opportunities for additional connectivity here. Staff didn't have any additional concerns about that, given the site location and the larger connectivity in the area. The site plan does meet your UDO requirements, and staff recommends approval of this request.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. That is unanimous.
All right, and the last item on the consent agenda for tonight is going to be item D1. This is PBR 2022-21. This is named South Fork Village. It's a proposed 220-lot planned residential development in an RS9 zoning district. The site contains approximately 47.01 acres and is located on both the east and west sides of South Peace Haven Road, between Snow Village Drive and McGregor Road. This is the proposed site plan. You can see it is bisected by South Stratford Road, and they show eastern and western sections. Again, this is a net increase from a previous planning board review with a preliminary approval of 40 lots. They've also realigned the entrances there to align with each other along South, the 4 entranceways. They've realigned those. The prior plan, just to give you a little bit of reference, this was the 180-lot preliminary approval. This site, frankly, provides better internal connectivity and better access to the proposed active and passive open spaces. The proposed density meets UDO requirements, and staff does recommend approval of this request.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion?
I just had a question.
Yes.
These are for sale houses, not rental homes, like that are nearby. I was just wondering.
I mean, again, as currently configured, I would say that is correct. There is a provision in the ordinance, I believe, I don't know that has to be disclosed at this point, that would allow, I mean, in other words, rental home, I mean, that's not anything that's really up for consideration before the planning board. There are ways that if you wanted to do this as a rental community and keep do like 10 or 12 houses on a block and have them all be on one tax lot, you can do it. But the only thing I can't remember is if that has to be disclosed at PBR time or not. Again, one of the things that generally speaking, the planning board does not get into, nor the city council for rezoning, is form of ownership. So rental versus owner occupied isn't anything that can be a land use consideration. I believe as currently constituted and contemplated, this more than likely is going to be for sale units, but that also wouldn't preclude an investor who wanted to buy all 240 units from buying them and renting them out. So again, I know that's I'm kind of skirting your question, but there's not really a way to definitively
I'm not taking
answer
into my
it.
consideration. I just know there's large rental home communities nearby, and I just didn't know if this was like
on
an
both sides of
extension.
the street.
Right, yeah.
You're exactly correct.
The only thing I would like to ask is, going south along Peacehaven Road at the intersection with McGregor, that's a really odd intersection if you're trying to get out of that subdivision. To what degree was that considered in this review?
I can tell you that they did provide a traffic impact analysis. So in that case, they probably would have looked at the larger area and the impacts that this would have further down.
Yeah.
And they're, of course, along this section of South Peacehaven, there are required additional improvements for turning movements. But I can't tell you if there were any further recommendations as far as a TIP recommendation from the impacts from this.
Okay, thank you. It is really awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we do have a previous motion and second on the floor. All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, the board we will now go back to agenda item B3, case F-1624 for the first public hearing.
Good evening. So this is F-1624. The petitioner is E.M. Light Airs. The site is 15.5 acres on the east side of Old Hollow Road, across from Old 66 Circle. And the request is special use rezoning from RS20 to RM8 special use. The site is located in GMA4 future growth area right beside the US 158 NC 66 activity center. One thing to remember with GMA4 is that if it gets public utilities, you're to treat it as GMA3. Location map, again, the activity center is to your west. You see the highway business, general business uses, and it's RS20 to the northeast and south. The aerial has a wooded lot with a access easement going up the west side and to the north that provides access for these two residential homes. The area plan has single-family residential 0 to 8 dwelling units per acre. And again, it's right outside of Walkertown and the activity center. This is looking northwest on Old Hollow Road. Subject property is on the right. And you can see the highway businesses there, and you see apartments. That was the general business zoning that you saw back in the area plan. This is looking north on the existing access easement. The proposed townhomes would be on the right. This is looking south on Old Hollow Road. Subject property is on the left. So you see that to the north, you saw commercial high intensity use, and you can see a low intensity use going to the south on Old Hollow Road. The site plan is a 100 townhome unit development. Density is 6.7 units per acre. The internal street circulation is going to be 4 private streets. There is sidewalk on one side of the road. Let's see, here we go. The sidewalk on one side of the road in the circulation, and on Old Hollow Road there's sidewalk, except for it comes to an end right at the access easement. There is internal private sewer, and there is public sewer that's coming down to the street here, Fallen Oaks Drive. There are 2 recreation areas in the middle of the property, and a 15-foot type 2 buffer yard is going to be around the entire property, including the front here with Old Hollow Road and the western portion between the townhomes and the access easement to the west. This is the townhomes, the 2 stories. This proposal provides an ideal land use transition between the US 158, NC 66 Activity Center and nearby single-family uses. The request will provide additional housing close to goods and services, and the developer's proposing additional buffer yard, again, 15-foot type 2 buffer yard along Old Hollow Road in the private easement to lessen the visual impact on vehicular traffic. Because of this, staff does recommend approval, and the site plan meets UDO requirements.
Good time for questions.
Yes.
The roads are going to be private.
Yes.
Do we require, I don't know how it works here. Do we require the roads, even when they're private, to be built to a public standard such that 30 or 40 years from now, when these roads all fail and all the homeowners start complaining, that it can potentially be accepted into the maintenance program?
I'm getting approval from the,
We do.
Okay, all right, thank you.
you did mention this is NCDOT, so.
Right,
All right, so it's-
right.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Mr. Aldridge, would you speak to Walkertown's objection to this, that they included in our records?
So yes, the traffic, so the improvement, the TIP project that's to the northwest, let me pull up the area plan actually, because it's a little bit longer, yeah. So the TIP project, the improvements end right here. They sort of, what do you call it? Taper down is the term. It starts to taper down from Walkertown Common Circle down, and it doesn't actually improve further down. The developer is required to put in a right and left turn lane on Old Hollow Road, but the concern from Walkertown is that this is a heavy traffic issue that it already backs up past the this property during certain times of the day.
Every day.
Every day.
But by the way, Walkertown's here to speak for that, so they'll come to that.
Any additional questions for staff? All right, thank you. So we do have opposition in this case, so we will go into a public hearing on case F-1624. We will hear from the proponents first. Again, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. The proponents are Dalton Ward and Amanda
Hodern.
Holdern.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly myself either, but.
Okay, all right. So who's ever speaking first, if you would state your name, address, and zip code for the record, please.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you all again. I'm Amanda Hodiern, 804 Green Valley Road, Suite 200 in Greensboro. So yes, you were right on, pretty close. As usual, your staff report is very thorough and does a great job with its analysis of this, and I think hits all the major points, but I do just want to emphasize a few things and speak to some nuances through our process. As you've heard and read, our request is to rezone to RM8 Special Use District, which of course is evidenced by and committed to via the site plan that's in your staff report and has been vetted by the TRC process. And I always just like to highlight that means that is the only thing before you, and if approved, that can be built via this process. So if anything were to change because of a change of heart, because of field conditions, et cetera, we have to come back through this process. So I just always like to remind everyone of that point. I also wanted to highlight a few aspects in terms of the consistency and the general planning reasonableness and balanced nature of this proposal that I would submit to you makes sense for these reasons. The site, as you've heard, is located directly adjacent to a major activity center at the intersection of two main routes. It's developed quite intensely with a commercial development that includes fast food uses, goods and services, multifamily, and has some vacant space around that conceivably, I think we all can imagine someday as that changes ownership and things continue to grow, would also potentially become part of that activity center as it's labeled under your planning documents. So as you've heard in your staff report, this proposal as attached single-family units rather than single-family offers and provides a nice step-down transition from that intensity that's been placed intentionally at that corner. And what that means is that single-family users, whether they be the ones that exist or ones that alternatively could develop on this site, should the site have to be developed under its current zoning, would not have to one day sit directly adjacent and next to that high-intensity commercial activity center, which is not really the guidance of planning documents and planning practice in the area. So this proposal does provide that nice transitional step down. In addition to providing the step down, what it also does is provide a housing option and housing choice for folks who enjoy the idea of living very close to those goods and services and employment opportunities. So you're creating a place where you can have people be able to walk to get dinner, to be able to, I think there's a tire place right up the road. They can walk home and wait while you're waiting on your tires to change. Some of those conveniences and niceties that come with living close to goods and services, and also employment opportunities and availability for workers to get to work without having to drive and congest the roads further, but also being able to have a job even if you don't necessarily have daily transportation right outside your door. So that's all the reasons that we like to promote housing close to these types of areas. Additionally, it is located along a major thoroughfare, which our planning documents, your adopted planning documents, do state is a good place to put moderate density. And then, of course, as was noted by Mr. Allred, with the provision of sewer here, your sewer line is available. The developer is proposing to meet that investment with its own lift station on site, which makes it viable to serve this subject property, and therefore is considered as GMA 3. Which takes it into compliance with all of those considerations under your plans. And I would also highlight that it makes sense to take advantage of y'all's investment in those public resources and infrastructure expenditures. And it makes sense to place a little bit of moderate density where those goods and services can, or rather where those resources and utilities can be utilized. Also want to talk about our community involvement process. As you all probably know and remember, we were on your agenda last month and asked for a continuance. And the reason for that was because we held a community meeting with our neighbors, and we got a lot of feedback regarding our original proposals, sort of modifications that were proposed to the gravel access drive that you heard about in staff's presentation that serves some of our residential neighbors to the rear, and also I believe is utilized or at least is important to the farm use to our north. So we did want to be sensitive to that. So we did pull back and submit a revised site plan that alleviated that pressure point, which was all stemming from our original plan that had a proposed access point at that awkward sort of five-legged intersection, if you will. So that's what was causing NCDOT to say, hey, something's got to go. So by removing our proposal for that and sliding our one entrance down further south, it alleviated that issue, and we're able to now have a site plan before you that completely leaves intact and fully functional the gravel access drive as it's currently situated, which I believe, which has been favorably received by our neighbors who we heard that feedback from at our meeting. I've been in touch with all of those folks who continued engaging with me after our community meeting, and they have expressed gratitude and that they like that aspect. Certainly there might be other things that you hear about today, but I know at least that critical element has been addressed, and we're pleased for that. We've also done other things to appropriately balance and mitigate this site plan to fit best in this location. As you've heard, we're offering the type 2 15-foot planting yard along our streetscape and along that gravel access drive where it's not currently required under the ordinance to try and preserve that visual corridor and the experience for motorists as they go along Highway 66. The other thing we're doing that speaks to the inevitable Highway 66 improvements is we're going ahead and dedicating that right-of-way for future widening, even though it's not in the current TIP project that does terminate just to the north of us. We've gone ahead, as you can see on our site plan, and matched that right-of-way width so that in the future, inevitably, when that does need to widen here, you won't have an issue with us having improvements in that area. And that also, for now, in the meantime, creates some additional setback of our homes from Highway 66. I do know that there's a concern about the capacity of Highway 66, and I know it's high traffic right now as everyone comes in and out of Walkertown in peak times. So we are committed to those turn lanes that you've read about in your staff report that we know we would have to build to do our part to at least stay out of, to allow people to get in the turn lanes and stay out of that stacking. Additionally, I think by choosing an appropriate land use here that doesn't exacerbate those issues more than they have to be is the other smart way to handle this. Otherwise, we're effectively saying that there's a moratorium on development on this property until the state comes along and widens that road, which has not been said and is not the case. So what we're left to do in the meantime is appropriately manage it and use best practices to ensure that we're doing everything we can in the way of developer responsibilities with improvements, and also not choosing land uses that just don't make sense. And I would submit to you that this land use does make sense for the reasons we've talked about earlier, with alleviating some road trips by the virtue that people can walk to where they need to go, and by the fact that as a relatively modest 100-unit townhome development, that just doesn't generate as many trips per day as would the comparable single-family zoning district that would need to go here to develop this property on sewer, which of course it is on now. So I believe that is really hitting the sweet spot between, yes, this is a traffic congested area, but also, the market is moving and things are happening. We do need housing. We do need responsible housing. And I think that this achieves that. I think that's everything I wanted to say, but I would like to reserve some time and mention that I'm available for any rebuttal from anything we need to address from the opposition. I also have with me here tonight our engineer, Mr. Dalton Ward. As you've heard, he signed up from Hugh Creed and Associates, who worked on this plan and worked with your TRC process. And I'll also have with me the principals of the would-be developer, YP Walkertown LLC, that have conceived of this project and have the property under contract if we need them for any clarifications. Thank you.
When do the turn lanes go in? They do go in prior to the road being widened.
Well, again, the widening project doesn't come down in front of
Okay.
this frontage, but those would be a part of our driveway permit process that goes
Okay.
through NCDOT, so we'd have to have those in to get that driveway
You mentioned
permit.
walkability. You just mean internal walkability in your subdivision? or
Well,
you-
the internal walkability is provided for in the way of sidewalks, but also we've been asked and have agreed to put a sidewalk along our frontage of Old Hollow so that people can walk up and get to Walkertown Landing and those commercial uses to the north of us.
Does your land touch the multifamily to the north, or is that still just like highway business law in the front right there? That's
We are not adjacent to it.
okay. So there's no possible connections to that multifamily to the north of your
Not at this
property?
time.
But there, and does the gravel drive prevent you from having pedestrian connectivity to the HB, the highway business to the northwest of you?
So if we want to leave it completely
Disturbed.
uninterfered with,
Yeah.
yes, it does. So that's why, we've put a sidewalk along the front and sort of directed people to the public access ways along
Okay.
the sidewalks.
All right, and then last question is, I don't expect you to build a lift station sufficient to, move sewage for the next 50 or 100-acre tract that gets, but is there any over-engineering being done with that,
I'm
or?
going to let Dalton speak to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. At this time, given the topography.
Dalton,
and-
I'm sorry. Could you state your name,
Yes,
address,
I
and zip code
apologize.
for the record?
I'm Dalton Ward with Hugh Creed Associates. We're the civil engineer on the project. Our address is 1306 West Wendover Avenue, Greensboro, 27408.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. At this time, with the topography of our site and the adjacent sites, it's not feasible, given the current uses, to provide sewer access. Our plan currently is to extend public sewer along Old Hollow Road, so we're already extending that public access there. The adjacent properties, there's no obvious uses that we can see where we need to provide sewer access at this time.
Where is public sewer, where does public sewer, is public sewer all the way in front of your western boundary, or does it stop halfway
So
along?
our plan, it currently exists at the first intersection. I'm not sure what the road name is.
Okay.
Just up Highway 66. Our plan is to extend, I think it's 3 manholes, and put it up to our entrance.
Okay.
And that is the extent we're extending it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
To the previous speaker, I'm still interested in that walkability because when I went out there, where does the sidewalk, the existing sidewalk
There isn't any.
and the
Do we have
crosswalks?
a wider,
Yeah, hold on.
and while he's pulling that up, the other thing to note is that there's an intervening property between us
Right.
on the other side of that gravel access easement. So even if, to the previous question, even if we were to have a little pedestrian crosswalk over that gravel access, we still haven't landed anybody at the actual shopping center. And, you know, to get an easement or be able to cross that additional property would be, of course, up to that other owner.
So it isn't really connected, nor did we see crosswalks across 66 in that area to get to the other services, right?
Well,
You won't want one right there.
I believe there's a crosswalk
We're
further
talking about
up.
walkability. I'm trying, I'll ask the same thing to Walkertown.
I believe there's I shouldn't, maybe I don't know, but I think there's a crosswalk or at least the infrastructure to cross up at the intersection where you would
You do?
want that to happen. I don't think you'd want people crossing here necessarily prior to the stoplights. But
I'm still wondering about up there because I don't believe I've seen anyone ever
I'll-
cross that.
I'll
But
I'll be quiet to
life
that
in
and
their
let
own hands.
Walkertown speak to it.
But the activity center, like at Walkertown Commons, I see sidewalks there, and then there's the middle missing piece that's undeveloped. So
And
hopefully that would then have sidewalks which would connect to yours.
Right.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, at some point, we have to acknowledge the incremental progress
Right,
aspect of this, that we can do what we can to get people closer to on the parts that we can control. And yes, that one intervening
gonna
property
come in.
is
That's
not
gonna
one that
come
we
in.
can go and build a sidewalk on, but when it does have one, at least now we'll be that much closer.
George, it's like if you were to stub a street at the end of it. It's like if you were to stub a street at the end of a development in the hopes that one day there's some connectivity. That's the burden. So walkability internally is all that can be assumed at this point, and the hope is, and I'm sure for future residents, that gets developed and sidewalks continue, and so they've provided an opportunity to allow for that.
And this doesn't meet our connectivity ratio.
Well, again, connectivity ratio is generally a function of single-family
Okay, I'm
development.
sorry, I'm sorry.
So for apartments, or for townhomes, it isn't, especially whenever they are private. If this were going to be connecting public street networks, we would look to do a public street through here, and then it would be subject to the connectivity ratio. What I was going to say is, in looking at, on Google Maps, everything on the north side of Old Hollow Road to the northwest, there is internal sidewalks within that entire development. The new, I believe it was, I don't know if it's NTB, but Mavis, okay, the tire place that was shown in some of those images, there are sidewalks along Old Hollow Road, and you can get in and walk extensively on the same side of the road and all that commercial and multi-family development on that side of the road. On the south side of Old Hollow Road, at the older shopping center that was built in the late 90s, early 2000 timeframe, it doesn't appear to be an extensive sidewalk network there. There are some sidewalks, but not extensively. And again, keep in mind, it's the difference in timing of development and when sidewalk requirements were put into the ordinance.
All right, any additional questions or comments for the proponents? Mr. Murphy, how much time do they have?
Approximately 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
All right, 2 minutes and 50 seconds if you all would, anyone else wants to speak? All right. Thank you. Opposition, we have, again, 12 minutes. We have two. We have Mr. Glenn Eaton, and Scott Snow. Whoever's going to speak first, if you'll make your way to the podium, state your name, address, and zip code for the record, please.
Hello, my name is Glenn Eaton. I live at 3591 Old Hollow Road. That's Kernersville 27284. Been there since April of 2004, and it's been wonderful. Just a beautiful piece of property. Believe it or not, I'm not really here to oppose so much of what's going on. I'm not against progress. I've actually built a commercial building in the city of Kernersville, and I've been through the process, and it lasted about 2.5 hours, my meeting did, so I was really put through the ringer. Not trying to do that here today, but you have to understand, we're on the defense somewhat when we were talking about this gravel road, because initially the plan was to have us come through their development to get to our property. So we've been very much on the defensive since that has come up. That has since been resolved, and we're extremely pleased about that. But there are some issues that we would just like to point out, and I think they're being pointed out, and that is the scope of this matter just seems to be very large. With the traffic situation that's been mentioned already, we never seem to get anywhere on that issue. We just never do. It's just going to happen, and it gets thrown over to DOT, and then they do what they want to do, and I understand that. But the scope of this project is very, very, very large. And even with the 7, places that have been removed already. The other thing that I would like to say, though, that would make this project so much better is if we could improve the buffer zone that's being proposed. We're talking 15 feet, but and I think somebody said they've been out to the property, you've probably seen that the trees along that buffer, or what we were initially calling a conservation area, is really made up of a lot of fallen pine trees, a lot of, trees that really do not give a so-called buffer. Obviously, the apartments that have been placed up there, we've had zero problems with anything up there, and they put a proper buffer up. They put the Leland cypress trees, they put them in thick, and we're not asking for that to be done all around the property. We don't think that's necessary, but we do think with the intrusion that it would be, we hope we're not asking too much to improve the buffer that would be adjacent to our property. It just backs right up to it, so we border it. And there is, we do understand that apartments, or the townhouses 20 through 40, I think it is, there's an open area there. And again, I think that's just supposed to be grass and just, very low. Again, that could be utilized possibly as a higher buffer zone. And the reason that it's so important to me, number one, it's so easy to get that right. It's just not a difficult thing. But the other thing is, it'll not provide just privacy, but it'll take care of security and protection for the people as well. One thing that's come up that has scared me somewhat is, if we have a sidewalk going across that gravel driveway, there is a lot of traffic coming in and out of there from the 2 houses that are there. It's not just the 2 houses, there's caretakers, there's other people. There's constant traffic on that road, and if you were to sit there, you would see that. And also, the Scott's property that's there, it is agricultural land, and it is farmed, on a regular basis. There's soybeans in that field right now. So, again, there's a little bit more traffic, I think, on that gravel road than what people might realize. So, we just don't want people crossing. We're not used to having to watch for, little kids and people out there, and it's just a security issue from as far as I'm concerned. Other than that, I'm not against progress.
Can you see the diagram?
Sure.
Are you talking about additional buffer along the northeastern corner, just the very tip of the corner?
Sure, yeah, and anything on that back end that the houses would see. We actually own both the houses back there.
Okay.
So, anything we could do would be just wonderful.
I was going to turn it to the site plan so they could see it.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, and the area I'm talking about up here is
just along that road.
Eaton Properties of North Carolina 2 LLC.
So my understanding, we just learned it's just grass and, nothing that would be high enough to cover up their structures. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
How much time is left?
7 minutes, 50 seconds.
7 minutes, Mr. Scott Snow. Can you state your name and address and zip code for the record?
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Scott Snow. I'm here to represent the town of Walkertown and the town council. Our address is 5177 Main Street. That's Walkertown 27051. And as I said, I'm here to elaborate a little bit on the town's recommendations that we made back in October. Some of those issues have been addressed with the changes to the site plan. There are some issues with the original driveway access that some of those have been removed. But there is still the general concern about traffic and the additional traffic generation that this proposal would create. I think doing the math is about 3 times what the current zoning would be if it was developed within the RS-20. So that's a concern with the town. As we mentioned, it does back up. There's the intersection of 158 and 66 during the high traffic time, high volume. It backs up way past this section, especially the traffic heading west, and that's probably not going to improve very much because the I-74 access is off of 158 there too, so you have a lot of traffic still heading that way to turn left. Also, some questions were brought up by the board about walkability. There are no sidewalks on 66. That area there on Old Hollow Road is actually 55 miles per hour traffic. So adding sidewalks to that area, and the town has approached DOT to change that, but we've not made any progress on that. And no improvements are planned, which has been brought up in that area. So for the foreseeable future, that will be a 2-lane, 55 mile per hour a road there. So sidewalks are perhaps not feasible to be put there, and the connectivity that improve the walkability to there is most likely not going to happen because you've got kind of a buffer there between this site and the town. And of course, the town can't extend, even if there was a potential of the town installing sidewalks there, we wouldn't be able to extend it to this site as long as it's outside of the town's jurisdiction. But the town also had an issue about the area plan and the recommendations in it, as is noted in the staff report. The proposed use is not consistent with the area plan proposed land use recommendations. The proposed land use recommendations is single family rather than multifamily. I think there is some mention in it from the staff report that there's a general encouragement to provide a variety of housing in this area, in the area plan. I will say from the town standpoint, we believe the town has provided that in this area. There's, as it was shown in the pictures, there's ample multifamily adjacent on this site as well as across the street. There's also multifamily available, and then further west down 66, there's mixed-use neighborhoods that have multifamily and single-family, as well as additional new developments that have that type of plan that are hopefully being built within the next couple of years. So there's an abundance of this type of housing available in the area already that we believe doesn't necessitate this to be extended out into the areas that are recommended to stay single-family. So that's our main concerns, is the consistency with the area plan as well as the traffic. And if folks have any questions about the town, I'd be glad to take them.
So when you look at Walkertown in the future, and I don't know how far you've extended that with your comprehensive plan or whatever, do you see this as being a neighborhood activity center and having crosswalks and safe places and lowering speed limits and things like that?
Well, we actually kind of already have that in the activity center.
Once you get over across that?
Beyond that, that's going out into the county, and in our area plan that's in the update, the recommendations in that is that area will remain primarily rural and smaller, lower density areas to be developed. We kind of, it kind of seems like we say every time one of these comes up, we don't recommend it going to the next lot, but next time it comes up, we say the same thing. So it seems like it just keeps kind of dominoing out into the areas of the county. So, we believe we already have those type of developments there in the town, actually right next door to this proposed development. And we've got several others that are in the area as well.
Yep, I've noticed that's been very quick development through there. Are there other places that could have multifamily that would not put as much pressure on 66 right here?
We actually have a couple of developments that have been actually approved a couple of months ago that are more internally to the town, that have access to Highway 311 rather than directly off of 66. So, and those are, true mixed use, that they are single family and townhomes that are being developed there. There's, I'm not sure the exact number, but there's dozens of townhomes included in that, as well as a development that's been previously approved off of Sullivantown Road, adjacent to the high school there. So, this type of use, there's plenty of these that that has already been approved by either the town and the county.
So the letter you sent, was it approved by the Walkertown Council?
Yes, that was a resolution from the town council, yes.
And I can't imagine that was an easy resolution, knowing some of the people that were in there. Was it very controversial?
Not really, no. It had full support from the town,
Okay.
yeah. And these are their comments and their concerns that they have with the proposal.
Thank you.
One question, does the town have any concept or ideas towards having, as mentioned earlier, a step down from the activity center to the single family? Because, it currently is single family or large lot and could become that again, but then it would be single family right up against commercial. Just want to know what the thoughts are.
I mean, I can see the value in that, but then I go back to where do we draw the line? Because it seems like this has been said when we went through the rezoning for the apartments. The recommendation was that we don't extend multifamily beyond this point. So I guess the kind of question with that is at what point do we say this is the border here? Because it seems like it keeps getting pushed further out with each request.
Personally, I think of apartments as being pretty different from townhomes, but that's just a personal preference of mine.
Any additional questions for Mr. Snow?
Just one. You mentioned you've got an abundance of housing and stuff like that, but you guys are growing 25% a year. I mean, that's
not that.
But, and I think all your 400 or 500 apartments right there are full, I believe. It just, I don't know. Maybe it's all the apartments you want, all the multifamily housing you want, but I don't think there's an abundance of housing available to move into, purchase or lease.
That's a fair point.
It's just a hot.
Yeah. Well, we've got probably 500 that have been approved to be, that have not been developed yet.
Is that the 311 to be?
Yeah, 311, and there's also one off Sullivantown that's several hundred as well. So there are some that are.
Apartments or those are apartments as well?
Those are, it's mixed use. They're PRDs, so it's mixed use with single family and townhomes in both of those developments, yeah.
Okay. Any additional questions for Mr. Snow? Thank you.
Thank you.
How much time is left for?
4 minutes, 40 seconds.
All right, 4 minutes left for the opposition, if anyone else would like to speak. All right, then seeing no one,
I was just going to ask, before you close the public hearing, am I able to address any of those?
no, we normally don't have rebuttal. All right, thank you. I'm going to declare the public hearing closed. Thoughts, comments, or pleasure of the board?
Any comments?
Yeah.
No.
No comments at all?
Well, some of the things I'm looking at would be, I agree with Mr. Farabee, this seems to be an intermediate
Yep.
use of multifamily that would, I would assume you may get more apartments to the north. You don't know what's going to happen to the north, but it is, we have diagrams showing this from the apartments to the different types of multifamily and density. So I don't really have an issue with that. I did have a question for planning staff. On the northeast corner where there's that easement through of the gravel road, is that kind of easement treated any differently? I don't think it is, but just in the regulations,
No.
nothing, just
No,
an
that's just,
easement?
that's the easement that's always, the easement has always been there, or it's been there before this development.
But, so there's no extra different treatment of the easement as a different type of property as far as the buffers go?
No. And this is a tree, I don't know, it's hard to read, but this is a tree preservation that's kind of through there, so they're going to keep what's there. But, yeah, that text is really small to read.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it really sounds like the town's in a spot on this thing. And normally I would say these apartments are a real good step down. There's another lot in between there that could be offices and a step down. if somebody wanted to do something like that. But, you know, I, in a sense, just like with neighborhoods, I trust the local authorities in trying to figure out where that line is. And I think we really need to listen carefully to them, because they've got to have some lines like that around there. This isn't as if we don't approve this, that there aren't going to be multifamily built. There's plenty of areas to build. You could go down 100 yards down the road and build that. There's plenty of land for development for this. So it isn't, this really needs to happen or not. And I think the town of Walkertown has had to go through a decision on this that's important to listen to.
Yeah, one of the things that I was looking at this a lot is the extension of the utilities, the sewer line to there, and the private investment of doing a pump station to add to that, which it seems like they're kind of melding the edge of those utilities and taking advantage of that, rather than, I don't know if you could do that with single family. It seems like you're pulling your density in to make good use of your utilities there. You're looking at the regional development of that. I don't know how much further out you could extend that type of utility at the expense of doing a denser development there, which is not what you, I guess, what people don't seem to want in that area. But as close as that was to that existing utility, it makes sense to me to use it for the density that's there.
All right, what is the pleasure of the board on this case?
I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Ms. McGray,
Second.
second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion?
I would just like to make the clarification that I would agree is consistent with the comprehensive plan rather than the area
The
plan.
small area plan.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose the same sign.
No.
One opposite, one opposed.
Comprehensive plan.
Well, I further move that the planning board recommend approval of F-1624.
I have a motion by Ms. McRae,
Second.
second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Oppose the same sign.
No.
One opposed. That passes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Board, we will now move on to case B8, case W3555, and again, we'll hear from Mark Allred.
Oh, see you.
B8. B11.
This is W3555. The petitioner is 4870 Robin Hood Tratorv LLC. Site is 44.3 acres on the south side of Robin Hood Road at southern terminus of Castle Drive, and this is a special use rezoning from RS9 to RM8 special use. This site is located in GMA3 suburban neighborhoods, and it is outside the Robin Hood Village Activity Center, in between that and Muddy Creek. Here's the site location map. So the site's, of course, in orange. What you see on the west and the north is RM8S apartments. To the south is RS9 neighborhood, Century Oaks neighborhood. Single-family residential neighborhood. This is the image. Hard to see from this far away, but there is 3 radio antennas. I think at one time there's 4, but one is down by this point. So there's 4 radio antennas that this site was used for. But as you see, it's a fairly open area. And this is, again, it's the area plan has this as utilities. This is looking west on Robin Hood Road. Subject property is on the left. This is looking south at the Castle Drive terminus. This is where the proposed development would access Robin Hood Road. This is looking east on the subject property. So this has a lot of topography. What you see down here is the creek that was crossing on your map. That's on the western side. Up here on the far west is the highest point of the property, and the ridge does like a crescent moon across the property. So on this side, you're on the far other end of the development, and this is at Muddy Creek. You can see how the ridge crosses across. You can't see the same spot I was at before. And Century Oaks, where the other connection would be, is about where the mouse cursor is at. This is a terminus of Century Oaks Lane. This is the property just to the left, so it's showing the applicant is proposing keeping on average, it changes about 50 feet of tree save area between this property and the development. And this is a terminus on Wild Dogwood Lane. If you remember when I was saying the highest point, this is it that you're looking at development. So you kind of see the survey marker right here. You are pretty much elevated over the development. Here's the site plan. So the western portion of the property has 8 buildings. Has 8 buildings that have 156 multifamily units. In the middle is 7 buildings of twin homes, which is 14 units. And on the east is 1 independent living center. Density is 7.98 units per acre. The internal street would be a public street, Castle Drive, which connects Robin Hood to Century Oaks. And then you have 4 private streets that connect to the parking areas. There is sidewalks on both sides of Castle Drive. And your recreation area is a pool house, swimming pool, clubhouse and pool on the southern section of the property. And there is also a greenway connection right here on the southeast portion of the property to Muddy Creek. And there is a 15-foot type 2 buffer yard that goes around the southern portion of this property, between that and a single-family residential. The applicant is proposing, make sure I tell everybody right, a staggered row of Nellie Stephen hollies below the retaining walls that you see right through here. And on south of the clubhouse, there is a 6-foot opaque fence that's between the clubhouse and the tree save area at this point. The development will have 3 small stormwater devices here and which is a large pond in front of the independent living facility. Here's the renderings of those 4 of the buildings. 5, apologize. 5 of the buildings here, proposed condominium buildings A, B, F, G, and H. This is a proposed condominium building C. And here is the proposed condominiums D and I. And that's the independent living facility. I don't know if the dolphins come with it. So y'all can ask that question. The summary of one thing to remember about street connectivity, 5271, all multifamily residential buildings must not block orderly public street network development. So it is required to connect to stubs where feasible. The summary is the proposed development would meet a critical need for additional housing choices for an aging population. So I looked up. Forsyth County has 24% of its population is 60 and above. So we're an aging community. The proposed plan is sensitive to adjacent land use patterns and incorporates appropriate design techniques to minimize impacts on adjacent residents. The proposed development has convenient access to the Robin Hood Village Activity Center, which is getting quite large. Its commercial activity is expanding. And the proposed connection of Robin Hood Road to Century Oaks Lane will provide a more complete street network and satisfy the UDO connectivity requirements. Due to these things, zoning staff is recommending approval, and site plan meets UDO requirements. Questions?
I had a question just about the category of the zoning. Independent living,
Life Care.
Life care, so
Yeah.
it's not considered commercial in any way? It's,
Life Care Community is, it's a, just like multifamily would go through commercial plan review, but it is considered a form of residential, so it's allowed in any of your multifamily districts. Well, not any. You can't do it in RSQ. I don't think you can do it in RM5, but RM8 and above allows the use Life Care Community. And essentially, it is a form of multifamily, but again, it would go through commercial plan review when it came time for permitting.
so there's a limit in terms of I was trying to find some definition when it would change from life care to something that's higher level care. Which would that be? Would that be allowed?
Yeah, I mean, again, under Life Care Community, the definition of Life Care Community essentially allows for its transitional housing, including single family up to even needing skilled nursing, and you could do it within the same building. But essentially, what it's aimed at is it's supposed to be in near residential settings, again, to allow for aging in place, or if again, let's say that your parent, is becoming older and wants to move from somewhere, and you live somewhere in this vicinity, they could move here and again be within close proximity to where you live. There are some specific definitions dealing with Life Care Community and the target audience. They have to be, I believe it's age 50 or 55 and older, and or handicapped. So again, there are some limitations on who could live there, but again, they are allowed in multifamily zoning.
And would it be correct to follow up on that by citing Harmony at Brookberry as a somewhat similar example?
Again, things in Brookberry, there are examples like on Griffith Road where you have like Homestead Hills, Salem Town, up on Indiana and that area where again you have different areas and things where you can transition in place. And again, this a lot of those are good, but they're not necessarily near what I would call heavy single-family residential areas, whereas, this is located in an area where you potentially could transition yourself into this, or again, if you have a relative who you would like to relocate to the area, it could be close to your neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. We will have a public hearing for case 3555. Again, 12 minutes for each side. For the proponents, we have Luke Dickey with Stemmel Associates. If you'll state your name, address, and zip code for the record, please, Luke.
There you go. Thank you.
Good evening, Luke Dickey with Stemmel Associates, 601 North Trade Street, Suite 200, Winston-Salem, 27101. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to kind of walk you through this project. Let me get it into our full presentation mode here. So what I kind of do is I want to give you a general overview because this case almost came to you as something else before we arrived here today. So we originally had proposed this as an RM12S development and was basically for 210 multifamily units, 10 townhomes, and then 140 senior living. We had our neighborhood meeting at that time with Century Oaks. A group, and so you'll see that we sent out 295 invitations to that. We actually had 94 people attend that meeting, so it was a good presentation. Usually we do a drop-in session, but we got inundated, which was great, so we actually had to turn it into a sit-down session so we could talk to everybody instead of being a one-on-one like we typically do. And so we got a lot of comments that came out of that meeting. Afterwards, then we had some individual meetings with the homeowners association representatives of Century Oaks to kind of discuss things a little bit further and to address and look at their concerns. At that point, we decided to withdraw our request of the RM12 to go back and then to revise the plan and what we were proposing at that time. So now we've come back forward here now with an RM8 zoning request, so reducing it down from the RM12 to RM8.
It's 156 multifamily condos at this point, so really looking at more for sale than it would be for rental. 14 twin homes, and then 178 senior living. So we shifted the balance more towards the senior living side just from a density, just to kind of help keep us near that RM8 density overall. Then we had a second neighborhood meeting with the group. That wasn't as attended as much, but we did send out again 295 invitations to that whole entire neighborhood, the same we did before. And I believe we had 56 that attended the meeting at that, so we were able to answer some questions at that time. And through that, we got some more kind of talks about, what can we do about coordinating traffic calming and some other issues, because obviously concerns that we've seen in cases before when we come in with these infill developments, tying into neighborhoods that are already well developed. The Somerset Heights recently was a case that we had when we were tying to Lockwood Drive. This is kind of the same scenario here. We're tying into Century Oaks, which is an older development that has, just ribbon pavement, no sidewalks, and then we're tying in with some traffic from that standpoint. So we had some discussions with that. Jeff Fansler, I know, is here. We've been copying emails back and forth, just kind of discuss what options do we have, and we'll kind of discuss those with you as well. But I just want to give you that kind of big, broad overview of how we are, where we are today. Again, this is the kind of the aerial that shows the site, and these are the 295 residents that we had sent all the invitations out to, and again, just a summary of that attendance for those requests. Overall, I just want to quickly just kind of walk you through the site plan. Mark did a great job of kind of presenting it is. Again, we're tying Castle Drive. That's our connection to Robin Hood. That's our one entrance that we have connection to on that side. And Century Oaks is stubbing to the site there on the south. So those are 2 points of access, again, that we're kind of really limited to on this site. While Dogwood Lane does connect stub into the site, but as you saw with the topography, to be able to make this a developable site, we've got to cut that knoll off and flip the dirt to the bottom side of the site. And so therefore, that's going to put Wild Dogwood Lane much higher from the site than what we're going to. I've got a cross section that will roughly show you in that general vicinity, so you can see the grade change that takes place there. What we had really looked at and consolidating was really take our multifamily units and move those up towards the Robin Hood Court Apartments and the Brooks Landing kind of condos there. So we're pushing everything up to that northeast side and keeping those internal. We do have one building here that's adjacent to the neighbors, but we kept that as limited to a 2-story. And so you can see that's a much smaller scale, being context sensitive in that case. The clubhouse, of course, would be more of a 1-story. And then transitioning to the twin homes, those would be roughly, 1.5-story types, with master on bottom and maybe bonus rooms up atop from that standpoint. The grade change does take place, so we got 2 stream crossings right at the very beginning that we come across, and then we kind of come up the hill to the high point here, and then we start working our way all the way back down to connect it back into Century Oaks Lane from that location. And then, of course, we got the independent living then that's kind of tucked over on this side. With that grade change that we have a series of retaining walls on the backside here. So there's roughly almost a 30-foot grade change that we'll be cutting in. So we've got stacked walls. So the houses that are here will be looking up and over. So the apartments are actually down below at that point. Then we get closer to tying into grade when we get into the middle. So that's why we're proposing also that 6-foot opaque fence outside the tree safe to help kind of create some additional buffers. And that basically ties from retaining wall to retaining wall. And then this side here is where we're starting to stack some more dirt. And so we have some retaining walls that this is basically up above, and that's kind of wrapping around the bottom side, so tiers. And so these houses are well below those retaining walls, but because of that, we proposed then to come in with those Nellie Stevens and some extra planting to screen those walls, and then also start to screen the houses that are up above. So we've got plantings on the bottom, we've got plantings on a mid-tier, and then plantings at the top of the wall to create a green screen through that area there. The Greenway connection that we had is actually, it ties in because just from a grade standpoint on the bottom here, but then we try to turn it to the north immediately as that we can, and then it ties back over then towards the Greenway. So originally we had it back behind these properties, but we heard their concerns about having that Greenway run right behind them, so we moved that away from them as fast as possible. We have one lot here where we got to tie in because it's just a grade, so we're proposing some additional screening there as well in that location. And then on the site plan, we've also called out on the other side for the Brooks Landing, they had a concern about what they would see with because there's kind of a valley here that comes in this section. There's a creek that runs almost right near into the backyards of these homes. And so then we come back uphill. And so we have some retaining walls here. So we're also proposing to do a row of evergreens on the top of that retaining wall as additional screening as well. And that's on the site plan. This area on this side here is all wetlands and floodplain, so no development is going to take place within that. And we have then the tie to the Muddy Creek Greenway. Overall, as you saw on the aerial plan, we basically have bands of trees all the way around the site, so we're proposing that as all tree safe. We want to keep that all existing larger vegetation, come back and supplement with whatever evergreens are going to be needed to meet the type 2 buffer yard requirements in those areas. So that'll be analyzed once we kind of get out on the site with inspections and look at where we need to do more of those planting areas to make sure we get that screens as proper. One thing that was mentioned from the Brooks Landing, they have concerns the floodplain actually comes up kind of right behind some of these houses. So everything is kind of draining through this area. So again, stormwater is always a concern. So we do have to meet stormwater controls measures. We're proposing those areas for kind of each site, with our larger one being down in this location here. And I kind of point that out because the ridge line comes right up kind of through the middle here. So currently, there's roughly, on this side of the site, there's 12 acres that's draining into that area that's behind the Brooks Landing. And when we redo this site right now, that drainage area basically gets reduced down to 6 acres. And so we're taking another 6 acres down basically to this pond away from them, so it's not going into the creek that's behind their house. So that's going to help alleviate some of the concerns that they have. One of the biggest concerns is because we have a culvert that comes underneath Muddy Creek Greenway. And I think that gets clogged and then everything kind of backs up at that point through that area. So we're in talks and discussions with staff about what can we do on the Greenway to look and analyze that culvert when we go and do our stormwater study. Does that culvert need to be upsized or replaced to allow more flow to come back through that area? So we're trying to look at those discussions there. So that's kind of a quick overview of the site plan that's being proposed. Here's the site sections to just kind of briefly talk about. This is over at the Wild Dogwood Lane at the end, so you can see cutting in with the tier retaining walls, the existing vegetation at the top. This line represents the existing grade currently, so you can see how we're cutting in. So then the apartment buildings can get well below then the houses then at that point. And then with the additional evergreen screening in here, most of that should be blocked from view. This is where we are building up then on the other side of the site. This is on down where we tie in basically to Century Oaks Lane. So this is the house there. And then so you see we do have a good distance between what we're proposing and the adjacent house. Trees remain in the middle, and then the supplemental plants with Nellie Stephen hollies, and then the ones on the tier. So they would be to basically screen all this area in. And of course then on this area, we'd have to supplement our evergreen plantings too to meet the requirements in those buffer yard locations. And most likely that typically means that we would put our plantings on the back side of all the existing vegetation because we don't want to hurt the roots on the inside right up against the property line to save those trees. Site section number 3, this is the Brooks Landing. So they have that stream that comes on the backside there. They have a lot of woods kind of through there, but we would come back in again and supplement, and you kind of see where our small tiered retaining walls are, and then we're proposing again to plant on top of that retaining wall to help screen that 3-story facility from them. So because our site does end up being above them in this scenario. As covered, the West Suburban Area Plan that was updated in 2018, called for this as utilities. So it's a good question about what do we do from the area plan recommendation on this. So we obviously looked at, again, the zoning of it being RS9 currently. That's 4.84 units per acre. I mean, technically, just from code, it allows 211 lots kind of on the site. And that will kind of transition here into what I'll talk about, traffic generation. So overall, with our proposed RMAS zoning, Ramey Kemp, who is here, we got Chase Smith. He prepared the TIA. The TIA that was submitted originally was with that RM12 case, but since we reduced the number of units, we didn't update that plan because we knew we were going to generate less traffic with this one. And so here's those numbers kind of for that. Overall, daily trips for a 24-hour period of time is 1,673 trips, with the AM peak being 108 and the PM peak being 137. It was estimated that we'd have a 25% distribution to Meadowlark Drive. So that's going back through Century Oaks Lane to get to Meadowlark Drive. And so kind of the breakdown of that then would be daily trips at 24 hours would be 418 trips, AM peak trips at 27, and PM peak trips at 34. So your AM and your PM is a 2-hour window that would basically take place in those. So you're looking at 3.5 cars, I think it's 1 car every 3.5 or so minutes that would come through. And if at the AM peak, and then it's a little bit more than at the PM peak. But, again, you'll have clusters of cars come through, you'll have a gap, and you'll have another cluster of cars come through. But that's just a kind of an average. So, we had some great meetings with the neighborhood, just kind of talk, what can we do from a traffic calming standpoint? Because, again, we're coming in with a new public street that's going to have curb, gutter, and sidewalk on the side. And so we've got separated zones then for pedestrians and cars. But once we enter into Century Oaks, we don't have that. We have ribbon pavement, and that's kind of where the access totally is for them. And in the section of Century Oaks itself is really wide through the subdivision. The side streets are actually a little bit narrower. And so Century Oaks Lane is what we're proposing, where it ties to Shady Maple right as soon as we come into their subdivision right there. So there's lots that back up off of Shady Lane, Maple Lane, back up onto our site, and then from there. So what we're planning to do is do some stop signs, 4-way stop, and then add some medians. So we're working with them on that standpoint, and I'll wrap it up here just really
Yeah,
quickly.
I think your time is up.
So that's the scenario that we're working with them on that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, but we're looking at creating a transitional, working with the neighborhood, and do the things that minimize the impacts to the neighborhood as much as possible.
Thank you, Luke. Any questions for you? Yes.
Could I ask you, Mr. Dickey, about your TIA for the current Century Oaks neighborhood? Did they look at what percentage of people from that existing neighborhood would cut through to use Robin Hood?
No, I don't think, Chase, that's really one that accounted for in the TI, because we're looking at with the traffic generation from this one. We know that we'll have some distribution, obviously, from the Century Oaks. We'll utilize this connection to get back out to Robin Hood, but that was not analyzed in the overall counts about what would go out there.
So you haven't estimated what kind of relief that would give to Meadowlark, to current traffic on Meadowlark?
So, the assumption would be, yes, we'd have anybody that would relieve traffic volumes on Meadowlark to be able to come back out to Robin Hood with this connection.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And just to provide a little bit of, again, a traffic impact analysis is looking at the impact that the proposed development would have. So again, you're exactly right. Ancillary to this, if this were to be approved, it more than likely could relieve trips on Meadowlark for folks in Century Oaks who perhaps are going to points east and northeast to go through this development to Robin Hood. So.
And avoid the intersection of Robin Hood and Meadowlark.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey.
Yep, thank you.
All right, we have for the opposition, Mr. Cliff Orgnon. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
I apologize. Yeah. There you go.
So my name is Cliff Orgnon, 4950 Shady Maple Lane, and that's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. 27106 is the zip code. So as you can tell, I'm in that Century Oaks neighborhood. And actually, I'm here on behalf of the majority of the residents, as well as the Homeowners Association for Century Oaks, Ashton Place, which I'll show you on a map, and Brooks Landing. And basically, we've had multiple meetings, as Mr. Dickey has alluded to. Wanted to actually thank Mr. Dickey, the property owner, Mr. Deneau. They've been very fruitful meetings, and you'll actually see some consistencies between the two presentations, even though one's for and the other one's opposed. And that's because we've been working towards some compromise here. And basically, what I'm going to point to today are some concerns that we still have, and we want to make sure that those are addressed as this whole process goes through. Page down. All right, so there's a map which you guys have already seen, and what this does is it kind of points out to the different neighborhoods that abut the property. So Brooks Landing is here to the north with 61 homes. Ashton Place is a left-hand turn right when you enter Century Oaks. It's a separate HOA with 25 homes. And then to the south is Century Oaks itself with 134 homes. And these are pretty well-established neighborhoods. I think Century Oaks is pushing 25 years in age. And this is an aerial view, basically same definition. Key point here is Muddy Creek on the back side. And there is a loop that Century Oaks has right back in here, which is behind our pool. And I can tell you that all this floodplain area often will flood up into our loop. So just be aware that when you talk about a 100-year floodplain, if you look at FEMA numbers, it's actually percent. I think it's 26% chance of flooding on a 100-year floodplain, and they have other levels like a 500-year. And as we develop these properties that are adjacent within the city, these floodplains are going to change. All right, then I got a few photos basically of the neighborhood. So this is the entrance to Century Oaks. And you can see the width that we talked about. And I would state that here Shady Maple, the side streets within the neighborhood are actually quite a bit more narrow. And the reason we wanted to put this photo in here is because it demonstrates that Shady Maple is basically a one-lane road for about 4 months of the year, because we don't get leaf pickup or brush pickup until after January 1st, it seems. So a point that I want to make to the board and later to the city council is going to be, if we're going to promote this type of growth and development, the least the city could do is honor the services that they've promised to their residents. So this is going into Ashton Place. So basically I'm standing on Century Oaks looking at Ashton Place. And this is Brooks Landing. So Brooks Landing comes off of Robin Hood, and it's got basically a circle. So you're seeing both the entrance and the exit to that circle. Okay, so kind of supplemented a couple of photos that you might have seen already. This is the actual development parcel. Standing near the top, looking down, you could see the gravel road for the utility service of the towers. And at the bottom is the last tower, which is actually down. It collapsed. I think more importantly is this view right here, which shows standing on the bottom, looking back the opposite way at the top. So it's about a 60 to 70 foot elevation if you look at the elevation lines on the map. And when you consider the development, what they're going to have to do is a significant amount of earth movement to level this out and put the pads down and whatnot. That will be a challenge, I think, for the developer, but there's also some considerations to be made in terms of what impacts that could have for runoff and flooding. So standing in that same spot, looking towards Century Oaks, I think these are some important pictures. They're more prevalent when you go further up Century Oaks, but basically you'll be able to see through the current tree stand that's out there. So that's why we're going to talk about evergreens in a little bit and whatnot, screening. And then same type of thing at Brooks Landing. So this is looking over toward Brooks Landing from that same spot, so you can see a few homes over in there. Okay, so first and foremost, we certainly respect the property owner's right to develop their property. And really what this is about is just a continuation of the work that we've been doing with them. We want to keep that process going. I think some of the concerns have certainly been addressed. There's still some concerns that might need some additional consideration. What we did is we conducted a survey amongst our residents, and that included all 3 neighborhoods. And we took those survey responses and organized those in accordance to the priority that the residents replied to. And number 1 is traffic calming. So ideally, we would not have that connector, but that doesn't seem feasible because of the home count. I think there was a previous case that showed a single connector, and there was a comment made about that. It's kind of funny. Would like that one to be 2 and maybe make this one 1. But and the reason is there is a transition from this proposed development in terms of having the sidewalk dedicated uses for pedestrians, and Century Oaks doesn't have that. Our streets are multiple use for traffic, a lot of kids that play in them, and bicyclists. So any type of mitigations that we can do to make sure that there's traffic calming, not only going from the new development into Century Oaks, but maybe we have to have some separate engagements with Winston-Salem DOT about what we need to do in Century Oaks to keep those speeds down. Absolutely 100% agree with the four-way stop. That would be at the intersection of Castle Drive where it connects with Century Oaks and then Shady Maple. And then the traffic islands was actually something that we proposed. It looks like it's being adopted, which is great news to hear. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a grade. As you come down Castle Drive, it'll be a downhill grade. So you want that traffic to slow down as they approach that stop. And anything we can do to calm that, so to speak, is definitely something that we would want. I've heard that there may be consideration of adding a traffic signal up at Castle Drive and Robin Hood. And Robin Hood, that section is state DOT, so state DOT would have to approve that. But if that is something that's funded, there's a likelihood that state DOT would certainly approve that. And we would be all for that because that would certainly draw the traffic away from Century Oaks out toward Robin Hood. And I did hear a comment that maybe the interconnection helps ease Meadowlark, but the exact opposite's true. These residents who want to take a left on Meadowlark may decide to, instead of trying to make a left without a traffic light on Robin Hood and then a left down Meadowlark, they're going to cut through Century Oaks and then try to make a left on Meadowlark. And at peak traffic hours, that's an impossible task almost. Maybe that gets better after the widening project's done, but we'll see. And certainly open to any other means of how we can accommodate traffic, safe traffic flow through both neighborhoods. So here's just an excerpt from the map. You can see Castle Drive coming from the new development into Century Oaks. So this would be Century Oaks Lane right here. Here's Shady Maple. And then here's the proposed four-way stop. And then what we're asking for is some traffic islands right here as you come down this downhill grade and approach that four-way stop. So second issue is screening, and I shamelessly took some of the cross-sections that Mr. Dickey had shown you already. But basically, visual impact of these large retaining walls and obviously potential sight lines to the buildings are something that all the neighbors are concerned with. So we just want to make sure that the tree save is per the plan. Request planting the new evergreens because there aren't many deciduous trees currently on that line. So you can see through the property line pretty easy right now at this time of year. And I did have a few comments regarding Leland cypress. I know that's a common tree to use, but some folks have told us that they sometimes don't do so well in the environment here. And I think that's because of the amount of rainfall we get and being planted too closely together. So obviously development appearance is something that's quite important to us. The price point to make sure property values are maintained, not only at Brooks Landing, but Century Oaks as well. And then we want to have some assurances on the types of buildings that are being built and any architectural elements and finishes that kind of promote value toward the property. And obviously per, I think the Legacy 2030 requirements and UDO, we want a harmonious transition, from these established neighborhoods to this new property. Greenway access was a big one, particularly for the homeowners that are just to this side of the retention pond. And here's one that's pretty easy because the site plan has been updated, and they've moved the Greenway access to this section onto Muddy Creek. So that's good news. Would like to make sure that's maintained. So I heard some discussion, I think, about rental units versus ownership, and that's not something of consideration to PBR or City Council, and understand that. But still, any elements that we can add to the site plan or to the architectural requirements of the buildings that promotes more of an ownership model versus a rental model, that's something we would be encouraging of. And then what might help that is some further work that we'll probably do with the developer to see if they'll do an HOA as part of this and then put restricted covenants in there that prohibits rentals. That's something we have within the Century Oaks restricted covenants. Lighting, and I know there's city ordinances regarding lighting requirements, but basically, in areas where the grade is higher than the neighborhood, that could be the biggest concern, and I didn't know if there was maybe some limitations that we could put, distance in which the property lines are at to where the nearest light fixtures might be. I don't think any of that's in the current site plan. So runoff and flooding is actually a pretty large concern, and it probably drops to number 7 because the developer has done a nice job of accommodating some of the concerns that Brooks Landing has. But there's still some concerns just because of the elevations that we're dealing with. So here's the new development pool. And then these are these duplex homes, and here's a retaining wall.
Mr. Orgnon, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right.
Can I just go to the last slide?
No, sir, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any
Thank
questions?
you. Any questions for Mr. Orgnon?
I was just going to say, I think you all working with them over the meetings and also stating your interest or your concerns and kind of playing it out in this manner, I think is really nice. It's good to see from community members taking some time to really think it out. So, good
Agreed.
presentation, sir.
Agreed, and it's taken a lot of time.
I bet it has.
But that's how the process, I think, should
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
ideally. Is that it?
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
When you were doing the survey of your neighbors, did you get the feeling that if the city would agree to put sidewalks through there, that they would feel good about that? Or are they going to be worried about their yards being taken?
So, Mr. Brown, that wasn't part of the survey. We were very discreet in terms of the survey questions.
Yeah.
We could check on that, but I know some people actually feel like streets that have multiple uses without dedicated sidewalks actually slows traffic down because people realize that, wait a minute, there's no sidewalk here. There might be pedestrians, there might be bikes. So I'd leave that to maybe somebody who's more of a subject matter expert on that.
Now, when I drove through that neighborhood, I did not notice a lot of on-street parking. It seems like everybody has garages or off-street options. Is that true?
Yeah, all the neighborhood homes, at least in Century Oaks, have at least 2-car garages, some 3, and large driveways and a lot of circular drives that come off the road.
Yeah.
I would say there are several folks that do park on the street, especially on Shady Maple where I live, which exasperates the problem with the leaf piles and the one-way traffic flow.
How long does it take you now to do a left turn on the Meadowlark?
Depends on the time. At 5:30 or 6, it could take a good 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Thank
members of
you,
the board.
Mr. Orgnon. Any discussion from the board or?
Do we get to hear Mr. Fansler talk?
You know, since he's here, Mr. Fangel, there has been a lot of conversation regarding traffic and the turn from Meadowlark. So since you graced us with your presence, we'd love to hear from
I'll be
you.
brief. Jeff Ansler, Winston-Salem DOT. Heard a lot of comments. You know, this site is challenged by public street frontage, obviously, accessing an existing Castle Drive. We've looked at this a number of times. Trip generation, you saw the numbers. I'm not going to dispute those. Our numbers that we calculated internally, independent of the analysis, were really very similar. So there's no really discrepancies there with what you saw. Turn lanes already exist on Robin Hood Road, and the storage links that are already there is expected to be sufficient for this. We could argue all day on the distribution. You heard that term about who's going to go where. It's based on where they're going. We have development trends that are going, existing development there off Robin Hood. We have additional development off of Robin Hood. That's going to change how folks travel. And it's hard to understand that model because the one thing that we're trying to do here and that this site does is provide that connectivity so that choice exists. What you do today may not be what you do tomorrow. And so those distributions can vary as the site develops. And what we want to do is provide that connectivity so those choices exist and minimize the point loads on these access points and distribute the traffic so we can help accommodate a better efficiency. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions. I heard the comment about a traffic signal. This is a an NCDOT road. Certainly, a traffic signal is not recommended at this time because we don't put traffic signals in at $200,000 a pop that don't meet warrants. And so NCDOT is going to have to be on board, and it's going to have to meet warrants before that traffic signal is going to go in. And today, and what's projected, it does not.
You say $200,000?
Roughly.
And Jeff, could you elaborate on that last part just a little bit? You know, again, it's one of those things where if it's a city street, we have a little more leeway, but being on an NCDOT road, if it doesn't meet the warrants, even if the developer was willing to pay for it, NCDOT more than likely would not allow it to be put in because it does not meet the warrants and it's within their right of way.
That's correct. And then they're not even allowed to make that decision if it doesn't meet warrants. So yes, you're exactly right. They will not allow that. And two, they don't have the authority at this level. That request, if it doesn't meet warrants, is sent directly to Raleigh.
What does that phrase mean, doesn't meet warrants?
Yeah, so there's 8 traffic signal warrants. Volume, accidents, pedestrians, different types of vehicle. It's based on demand.
Criteria.
It's criteria. And so there's studies that indicate if it's warranted or not.
Thank you.
If I could, the one other thing I would want you to mention is Mr. Bryan did mention sidewalks within Century Oaks. Can you speak to the city's sidewalk participation policy, because the city doesn't have money to go in and put sidewalks? So I did just want to make sure that was mentioned. I don't think Century Oaks is clamoring for them, but I did want you to touch on that real quickly.
Sure. So there's 2, and if I understand your question, Mr. Murphy, there's 2 ways sidewalks are built in the city. One's capital outlay, where there's a capital outlay request, we have to request public money for a major capital project. Or 2, we allocate money with NCDOT federal allocations of dollars to do federally funded sidewalk projects. So it's basically federal money, what we could apply for and get sidewalk built. So right now, it's based on, we have a long list of sidewalk requests, and basically when sidewalk requests come in, they're vetted for future funding.
If I understood you correctly, if residents of an area decided they wanted a traffic signal, they could not pay for it themselves.
That's correct. They could offer to pay for it, but if it's unwarranted, it's not going to be installed.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just one other thing. I believe we've entered into discussion. I don't believe we ever closed the public hearing.
No.
Oh, sure didn't. I declared the public hearing closed about 4.5 minutes ago. Definitely my apologies.
Jeff, one question in reaction to one of the concerns of Century Oaks. Your thoughts on traffic islands as you go down the street and connect with the new development?
Yeah, so we had that request presented to us for enhancements of traffic calming nature of these islands. You know, the location where they go is significant. Islands restrict movements. I think we'll have to continue to review that actual site plan, but in theory, I think we can get on board. Where they go, we probably need to refine as far as exactly how they're implemented. But I think from a perspective of what's being proposed, and if we can maintain the turning movements and there's no issues with that, then I think we would be supportive of that. But it's pending further civil engineering review.
So that's still a work in progress?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And if I could note, that is not shown on the plan. So if that's something that is an important consideration, and again, I don't want the planning board to necessarily have a condition of approval, and it's something that whenever it's looked at a little more in detail, that it's not warranted. It may be something that, if the planning board is so inclined, you want to encourage staff and the developer to continue looking at that, and maybe we can have a definitive answer by the time it would go to city council. And if, at that point, if there's an agreement, we could have a condition of approval.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Any other questions for Mr. Fansler? Thank you so much. Mr. Murphy, I have a question. So one of the things the neighborhood was mentioning was architectural design and talking about the rental units, the number of rental units versus home ownership. Any thoughts on that? I know that's not something we can regulate, but.
The architect, because these are residential building, multifamily, and they have included elevations as part of their proposal, the elevations become part of the record, and they can and will be held to that. And we actually have a condition of approval related to that in our conditions. The proposed building plan shall be in substantial conformance with the submitted elevations as verified by planning staff. So that's prior to issuance of permits. And then under prior to issuance of occupancy permits, we make sure they built them the way they got them approved. So from an elevation standpoint, materials, design, all those kind of things can and are part of the approval. Related to price points of units, price points of, whether these are rental units or condominium / owner, that's something from a land use, again, similar to the other case, we can't get into from a land use perspective. Land use, again, looks at the type of use that it is, and it doesn't care if someone owns the property or leases that property. Again, private covenants, if there's something in a covenant that, as a side agreement, the developer and the neighborhood, Century Oaks, the Ashton Place, the other neighborhoods, if they can come to some type of agreement and they do some type of private covenant, that's outside of our purview. We can't enforce those. Again, we also can't prevent them from happening. So again, there's not anything from an approval process, a recommendation by the planning board, or an approval process by the elected body where that can be addressed. But again, it would not preclude them from doing some type of private agreement, but it would be outside of the municipal involvement.
Thank you. What is the pleasure of the board if there are no other questions or comments?
Well, I did want to mention that back when that other Brookberry neighborhood was put in, I pushed Mr. Fansler on the speed limit on Meadowlark and the signal. I got basically the same answer. We have to go somewhere else to work on that. That speed limit is clearly too high for the traffic that's coming in there with the new Publix and all those apartments that are coming in there. It's way too high. So I hope there is some way that the neighbors or whatever can encourage the state to take a look at that issue. It's just dangerous right now.
Mr. Chairman, I move the planning board find the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion for approval by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I further move the planning board recommend approval of W3555.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, we'll now hear case B9, and we'll hear from Kelly Bennett on our staff.
Takes a minute, sorry. There we go.
So do I.
Mr. Chairman, I think I hear that I've had someone say that they would like to take just a slight break. If that's, I'll defer to you, but I don't know whether maybe you want to take a couple-minute break for.
You all need a break? Do we need to vote on it? We're good?
Whatever.
Fine. I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go. Let's plow through it.
I'll be right back.
All right.
Take them on.
Are we on break?
Yeah, we're ready.
We're ready to go.
Oh, okay, great.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4,
Chris,
5,
my
6, 7.
bedtime's coming up here.
Mine too. That's what I gotta get finished with the meeting.
Do we need to get you more coffee?
Good evening. Our next case is W3556. The petitioner is ACG 1010 Northwest Boulevard, LLC. The site is 0.83 acres, located on the southwest corner of West Northwest Boulevard and Bridge Street, located in the Northwest Ward. The request is for special use limited rezoning from GI to GBL. You can see the site on the Legacy 2030 map. It's located in Growth Management Area 2. And the location is within the West End Activity Center. And you can see there are a couple of recent rezonings to the GBL zoning district to the east and to the west. This is an aerial image. You can see the building on the corner of Northwest Boulevard and Bridge Street with surface parking
on the western side. This is looking south at the existing building from across Northwest Boulevard. And then just to the west, looking south at the existing parking lot across Northwest Boulevard. Looking east toward the existing building and the parking lot. And looking southeast along Bridge Street, the site is on the right. And this site was recommended for office use in the South Central Winston-Salem Area Plan Update in 2015. It's in the West End Activity Center, which recommends a mix of uses. It's close to downtown. Obviously, it's an activity center where we're encouraging walkable development. In summary, GBL zoning provides more use flexibility for the property than the existing GI zoning. The proposed GBL zoning district is conducive for mixed-use development within an activity center, and the request is consistent with the recommendations of Legacy 2030 regarding infill and activity center development. The recommendation is for approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Did I see something in the paperwork about this being residential? When the questionnaire went out to the neighborhood or the existing folks?
Mr. Bryan, that may be what the ultimate use of the property will be, but as far as speculation, we weren't able to tell since all the uses.
So that wasn't part of what I saw? I may have...
Well, Mr. Brown, I believe in the letter from the attorney, Ms. Hodiern, who is also, who represented an earlier case, she is still here, and she represents, I believe, the petitioner in this. I believe in her letter it does speak to that's the intent, but of course, since this is limited use, we would have to consider all the uses requested.
Right. My concern would be, and I mentioned this when we talked about Weaver, when we're doing mixed use, what assurances can we say to people that want to use residential in there, which I fully support, that the business right next to it isn't doing something that would be a danger to residential? And I think we in the city and planning need to be able to reassure the developer that there isn't some kind of activity going on in an adjacent building in an industrial area like this that might be dangerous to residential. Do we know that at this point?
I think just to kind of reiterate what the staff said when we were talking about UDOCC 17, there's certainly, for various types of non-residential construction, there are fire department schedules where the fire marshals do go through and inspect spaces. However, that doesn't really tell what folk can do in their spaces outside of those inspection dates any more than someone could do something potentially dangerous within a residential space in a multifamily complex or single-family dwelling. So in short, I'm not really sure of any way that we could 100% guarantee that type of expectation.
Yeah, I don't know that there's been any attempt to do that with the fire inspectors or anything like that. My point is, if we're going to do mixed like this, and we're going to put it in industrial areas that have previously been industrial areas, there are transition periods, and there are people storing dangerous chemicals, there are people doing different activities there. And I think as a city, we have an obligation to those developers and to the people that live in there that we need to do our best to ensure that this is a safe area for them to do this type of residential development.
Well, can I add one thing to that? Just may not be appropriate in this discussion, but it's something that I think your concerns are valid, but there are other organizations and other assessments and laws and rules that are going to pick something like that up before it's purchased by the prior use of it, from OSHA to the HAZWOPER rules to all kinds of things that would say if you're using a chemical that's dangerous, you're going to have to store it a certain way, report it a certain way, have certain distances from other uses. So it's not a true free-for-all. There are a lot of other restraints, and regulations that cover some of these hazardous situations that could exist.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. We will have a public hearing on case W3556. We have Amanda Hodern as speaking on behalf of the proponents. Again, each side will have 12 minutes.
No problem, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see everyone again. Amanda Hodiern, 804 Green Valley Road, Suite 200 in Greensboro. As you've heard from staff, this is a limited use general business request, so we're not here to talk about site specifics, but I will just confirm off the top that we were very transparent in our letter to our neighbors. You know, we like to get the information out there and start a dialogue. So we did share that that's our ultimate intended use, but the reason that we're pursuing this pathway now and starting with a GBL request is because while my clients do own the property now, they own 2 buildings across the street, so they're invested in this area. You know, as site planning goes, especially in these small infill sites, it can get difficult, and sometimes your first plan doesn't work out. So we wanted a zoning district that allowed us some flexibility to have some different moves if the first plan is unable to be accomplished through TRC review. And then also we wanted to match it and be consistent with the GBL pockets that are already emerging in this corridor. So 2 of which are owned by this property owner and my client. So and are thriving and successful sort of transition, you know, redevelopment uses as contemplated by your legacy plan for this area. And so I think that that's going well. My client is certainly encouraged by it and wants to replicate that on this piece of property. So what we have done is crafted our use conditions to match those GBL districts that you see immediately to our east. That's how we submitted. And then we ended up eliminating 2 or 3 more just based on staff suggestions. As we went through the process, just to get it a little more refined. But with the exception of, I think, 2 or 3 uses that we ended up getting rid of, our use list matches that GBL list right across the street. So just by the luck of the draw, in this particular scenario, we do have a lot of control and knowledge about what's going on adjacent to us in that property that my client owns, just as it were. So again, I think your staff report is pretty well on the point on this, and I'll be brief given the hour. But this is really about my client wanting to again start to transition and turn over another building on this corridor. They like being here. They as I said, have experienced a great success in their property across the street, and you know, their sort of sweet spot in their development model, it's a real estate firm out of Philadelphia, is reinvestment properties like this and sort of these new urban type of projects where we're seeing the need to kind of turn over these older industrial areas and let them turn the corner into their new life. This site is highly desirable given its proximate location between really desirable neighborhoods. You've got Buena Vista to the west, you've got the West End to the south, and then you've got all of downtown to the south, to the southeast, with all of the entertainment, eating options, employment options in that area. So the viability of this corridor continuing to move into its new life as contemplated under the comp plan is very reasonable and successful and well underway. So this would be the next step in that process that my clients want to buy into or have bought into and want to continue investing in. We've talked about viability a lot tonight and kind of creating these whole communities in areas. So given all those entertainment options that we've talked about, it makes sense to add a small sort of boutique residential component here that allows people to live in those areas and get to all those things that are so desirable that I've just mentioned without having to walk, or without having to drive, excuse me. And what's different here than my previous case is that all that infrastructure already exists. Of course, we've got all the sidewalks that anyone could want, and we've also got transit already in place for this whole area. So this is really a place, we talk a lot about car optionality. This is really a place where you could actually do that. By infusing some residential here, you really can live, work, and play in a bubble, and really can be car optional. So that's really what this request is all about, setting the stage to try and pursue a use like that in this location, but also keeping some flexibility for the property owner to pursue other appropriate uses in this location in case the site planning and the TRC process can't support that. And we know that those other uses on the list are also viable and a good fit because we've done so intentionally by matching it to the districts already in place here. I have with me tonight Aiden Stolzfutz. He's our civil designer and engineer on this. I know we're not here to talk about specifics, but in case you do have questions of that nature, he is here. He's been working with the TRC team on this, and should this be approved, would be the one leading that TRC process for our ultimate site plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you very much. How much time is left for the?
7 minutes.
All right, 7 minutes if anyone would like to speak in favor of this request. All right, seeing no one, I would turn to the opposition. Mr. David.
Hayes?
Hayes.
My handwriting is terrible.
Last name again?
Hayes, H-A-Y, yes.
Hayes, okay, thank you,
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman, members of the board, I'm a small business, my name's David Hayes. I live at 4417 Bent Tree Farm Road, Winston-Salem, 27106. I'm a small business owner. I've been in this neighborhood for 30 years. I represent Lotta Calvert, who owns 2 buildings right across the street. I don't know what other 2 buildings this gentleman. I didn't really know what I was going to say here. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm not sure how to follow. This is an industrial area, a commercial area. This is not a residential. And like this gentleman said, when I got the letter, I called and said, what is this all about? I've been here 30 years. I remember Mr. Wimmeyer had the old warehouse up there, and Mr. Pleasance had the hardware store there, and they had his office building across the street, which they're now trying to redesign. And this gentleman was with the Children's Center. He knows what's in that area. This is ridiculous. This is a commercial area. There's property on 8th Street, there's property downtown, there's property on 2nd Street. This is a walk-run district at night, I'm telling you. I just had 5 catalytic converters stolen out of my trucks. I have windows broken constantly in my vans. We own S&L Painting. We own the 2 buildings, 1001 and 1011, right across the street from this place. And you know, it's a frustration because it's a small bit. You guys aren't going to listen to me. I'm a small business. You're looking at the big shot. I want this place to grow. That's my property. But this is not what I want put there. I called, and I like you said, I called and asked the question, what are you going to do here? Because I'd love to see this neighborhood improve, because it's like I said, it's a walk-run district. Daytime you walk, you run at night. You don't know what to expect around there. You're not going to walk downtown from here. You're crazy if you do. I'm telling you where the neighborhood is. It's not the place to do that. My comment is that we're looking at, you guys hear this all the time, traffic. The gentleman here, they don't even have bicycle lanes on this road. It is a small road. It is terribly, I don't have a pointer, but it is terrible coming out of Bridge. That's a blind road. Look at the traffic area. Go look at the police reports, how many accidents they've had. There's no exit out there. You come on the other side of the building, there's a blind hill where you go up over the hill where Mr. Pleasance used to have his hardware store. This is a commercial, not a residential area. So I called and I asked the question this gentleman said. I came down here because I heard one thing. We're going to put 72 units in this place. And I said, what? I want you to improve it, but that's ridiculous. Where are you going to park? Well, we're going to put them in the basement. 72 units times 2 cars is 144 cars. Where in the hell are you going to put 144 cars in a basement? This gentleman's a traffic guy. Go look at it. This is a small road. If the daycare is there, which is a health thing, when the bus stopped there, you had to stop and wait for the traffic to go by. It's not even big enough to put a traffic thing. from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 6 o'clock at night, traffic's backed up to Thurman Street. In the mornings, people going to rentals, and the Wiley schools, it's backed up then. Across Renola Road, road is wide. They have a bicycle lane. You can't even put a bicycle lane on that part of the road. I mean, I'm probably wasting my time standing here talking to you guys, but this is ridiculous. I want them to improve that area. That would be great. I'd love that. My property would be back. I own 2 buildings right there. S&L Painting owns 2 buildings. You know, I just don't understand. I want progression. I want the place to be nice. I've been there 30-something years. I've seen this thing change. You have restaurants there now. You have a vet place there. You have a nice office complex up there. And I've talked to some of those people. They don't want this hotel, motel, multi-unit house. Put a nice restaurant there, it would be great. We have the porch. It's a nice restaurant. Go try it. But go over there and sit down and look at what this place looks like and see I hate to talk about traffic because everybody complains, but see, I can't get in and out of my driveway in the mornings because of traffic. And when school's on, it's even twice as bad. So I ask you to consider this. This is not for family. This is a commercial place. I've been there a long time. I've seen it change. Nice place. But my God, you can go anywhere and find ultimate nice homes. I mean, I don't regret anything going in there to make it better. My property would be better. But for crying out loud, tell it like it is. If you're going to build 72 units in there, then come up here and tell them that. I mean, I just don't understand this. I apologize. I'm not a speaker, but I'm a small business, and I can't fight those people. I don't want to fight those people. I want that property. I almost bought it one time. I wish now I had. If I had, I wouldn't be having this problem, you know. But for crying out loud, consider us a small business. I've talked to 5 or 6 people, and none of them want unit houses in that place. I mean, you can't travel there, guys. It's impossible. And that's not the only reason. It's a commercial area. Please consider that. It's not a housing place. There are plenty of places, 2nd Street, beautiful houses. Downtown 4th Street, beautiful houses. 8th Street, beautiful houses. You're not going to build a house there and walk downtown, I'm telling you, unless you got somebody with you or you got a sidearm. I'm telling you. I don't mean to get out of control, but you guys, consider this from the standpoint of small business. That's what's up there. And this is not for homes, and it's not, I don't care what they put in there, but not 72 units, for God's sakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Any questions? All right, how much time is left?
6 minutes
All right, we
remaining.
have 6 minutes left for opposition. Is anyone else here opposed to this request? See it? Yes.
It's GMA 1, GMA 2.
2.
All right, seeing no one, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed.
Any comments?
Well, I do appreciate S&L and being in that neighborhood and the work that they've done over time. I do see that, I guess the dog slipped out of the door a long time ago in this neighborhood. I like to protect commercial and industrial because we don't have enough industrial in Winston-Salem. But when Chatham went apartments, when the place in front of BNC Motors turned into a church, when the porch went into an industrial place, when other things happened like that, we knew that it was a change and that industrial would no longer be in that area there. So I see this as going along that way. My only concern is with safety, and I hope that will be duly noted in the minutes. But otherwise, I'd like to see the transition this neighborhood is making.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion?
I would. Mr. Chairman, I move the planning board find that the request is consistent with a comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Farabee. Any questions? All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I further move the planning board recommend approval of W 3556.
Motion for approval by Mr. Lamb. Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous. It passes.
Mr. Chairman of the Board, the next item on the agenda is item B11, which is a UDO text amendment. I'm going to challenge Steve to make a two-minute presentation on this.
He always gets the short end of the stick.
That's okay.
He's always here late.
Time me, I'll be 2 minutes.
All right.
Kurt Thomas, here I go. Good evening. This amendment is to require that the first or base layer of asphalt in subdivision streets be installed prior to the acceptance of financial surety for the remaining infrastructure improvements and plat recordation. Amendment was requested by the city engineering staff to clarify street construction requirements and to codify an existing city policy to reduce any developer confusion. Like I said, the city as a policy requires the first and bottom layer to be applied. And that, once the surety and plat is recorded, then individual lots may be sold. The policy reduces the potential for the structural integrity of the stone base to be compromised if it is exposed to cold weather, which if it did would shorten the lifespan of the street, causing more maintenance. Like I said, it's been a city policy for several years and is well understood by local developers. And this amendment was presented conceptually to the quarterly develop forum in September, and we have not had any issues raised or sent to us since that time. So with that, we recommend approval.
1 minute. Good job.
1:18.
He's a man of his word.
Are there any questions? All right, what is the pleasure of the board?
How can you say
Mr.
that?
Chairman, I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. That is unanimous.
Chairman, I further move the planning board recommend approval of UDO CC 20.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Second by Mr. Farabee. Any discussion? All those in favor, sign of aye. Aye. Oppose the same sign. That is unanimous.
Now it's my turn to be on the clock to go quick.
Give him 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman of the Board, under staff report, I will turn to Brian real quickly for a preview of your January caseload. I would like to tell you it won't be as long as this one, but I don't want to lie to you. I can't promise whether or not there'll be hearings, but I think we'll have the same number of cases.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So for January, we do have the 3 continued cases from this hearing. That's W 3550. It's a rezoning on Country Club Road for a storage site. W 3554. That's the Brighton Point multifamily, and then a preliminary major subdivision in the, near Rockland. We have 6 additional new rezoning requests. Not presaging anything too much, but 4 of those are general and limited use cases, so not attached with the site plan, and then 2 planning board reviews. And I don't know if I got a chance to tell everyone, hopefully in the beginning, but happy holidays.
Oh, thank you.
You too.
Mr. Chairman, beyond that, as far as I did want to give a brief staffing update, of course, David Reed retired last week, and this week he won Supervisor of the Year for the city. So he walked out the door and got other accolades after he left. So again, David's retirement is in effect. I believe Nick has left, but I think a lot of y'all got a chance to meet Nick at the reception earlier. Nick is new to our staff. Has been here about a month. Been doing a great job. He took Samuel's position. He's doing a lot of minor subdivision and other plat review, which will continue to take some workload off of Brian, hopefully, as Brian's doing about 2 or 3 jobs at this point, and Mark and Amy are doing a great job of assisting him on that. The last staffing issue to to alert you to is Ed Hairston on our staff. His last day was yesterday. He has decided to go elsewhere, so Ed is no longer with us. I did want to let you know that. Tara will be in the process of trying to fill that position over the next month or two, so hopefully we can get that filled quickly. Just real quickly, case updates. Just so you know, I know that they're included in your packet, but just a highlight of a couple. W3529 Somerset, the RM5S case was approved by council back the 1st of November. They also approved the RS7 case on Akron Drive, which was HB to RS7. The text amendment for fertilizer plant and battery manufacturing was approved this past Monday night, and they have already approved the electronic submittal changes to the UDO. From a county perspective, the NBS at the corner of Kernersville and Hastings Hill Road for the used food or drugstore was approved by the commissioners last week. They also approved the townhome project further on Hastings Hill Road there at the Beltway, and they approved the site plan amendment to the GIS case out on Renolda for the storage services retail. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for staff report.
Is there anything else? I would like to make a quick comment. Going back to case 3551, I know it passed. I think it was 3551. But the pictures that Mr. Bryan shared is really is bothering me a little bit. And I know that area has flooded many times. And I think we did the right thing by approving the case. But I don't want that to go overlooked. Is there anything that can be done about that?
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to sit here and give any false hope or any promises to anything. Obviously, that's outside of our purview. Obviously, I know that the city stormwater is aware of the issues, especially at the confluence of several of those streams and kind of the impact of at Bethania Station and some of those multifamily units. Several years ago, those multifamily units, at least I know one of those buildings that, kind of sits below the road. There is no one in those lower units now and hasn't been for a number of years. But again, that's an existing problem that I can't sit here and say that the city has any solution to. Obviously that's a big picture item. It gets back to, stormwater is looked at on a case-by-case basis when development comes through, but stormwater is a regional multi-property issue, and the solution to those kind of situations are often astronomical in cost. So I can't sit here and say that there is a solution. Obviously, I know that the stormwater is very aware of those situations and know kind of where the hot points are.
And I just want to add, a lot of times the hot spot is not where you see the flooding, it's where it started somewhere. So
yeah, there's like George mentioned, this is not anything new. This is a big, but it did seem to generate some attention towards some of the devices that were not performing properly. I think they did get some money thrown at them. I think even in this area, some of the stuff to where there's no continuing obligation to maintain those things because of the age of those devices. They were at a time before the law required, maintenance or whatever.
I was hopeful of that, so I drove up Old Town to where the dead end was. I walked across the kudzu.
Yeah, same. Broken pipe and everything. No kidding. Wow.
We just don't want a disaster to happen and then all of a sudden it's in the public spotlight like Weaver. I hate using that analogy, but.
And again, that's, y'all are spot on with the concern. I just can't sit here and say that there is a solution, similar. And again, I can't speak for every department, but it was mentioned earlier about the, and again, I don't want to keep on any longer than I have to, but it was mentioned for the case out there on Meadowlark and Robin Hood, the Century Oaks and the leaf pickup. It's one of those things where, the city is having an extremely hard time in filling those positions. In Keith Huss' shop with street maintenance and, some of his stormwater crews and those type of things, and doing sidewalk repairs and those kind of things. They generally have, I think, 5 crews. And again, I'm just throwing numbers out, and I don't know if these are right, but they have something like 4 or 5 crews, and they only have enough staff to have 1 crew. from a sanitation and leaf pickup standpoint, it's so bad that the city is actually, we're so far behind on leaf pickup, the city is actually contracting that service out to another entity because we don't have enough staff to pick up the trash to get to leaf pickup. So again, it's just further examples of, staffing issues at the local government level being a problem with service delivery. And again, that's not an excuse, it's just a reality. Again, I will make sure to reach out to Keith and send him an email and just, at Keith Huff in Stormwater, and just ask him, hey, if you have a chance, just, look at look at that case and look at the very end of the meeting as far as the discussion, just again, so that he is aware again of the concern of the planning board.
And I just want to add that I know a lot of things are beyond our purview, but we still have the right to bring it up and ask.
Correct.
And I want
Definitely.
I want to encourage us all to do so, both individually and as a board.
Right.
There's some value to a squeaky wheel.
Also,
genuine concern.
I also just want to make sure that there's not a sense, and again, that
it's not a sense of the planning board's responsibility. I get that.
Or that I can promise anything, but the message can be delivered,
as long
no
as you
problem.
Promise, you can make sure they see the video and they know we are concerned.
There's very little reality in my Christmas list, but I still wrote it.
Is there anything else for the good of the order? Oh.
Can I use my 40 seconds that I got left?
Yes, sir.
Oh, come on. I just want to point out that this issue is not just limited to Winston-Salem. High Point has the same issue, and it's around its hospital. So you talk about flooding when emergency vehicles are trying to get through. The problem ended up being the whole storm drainage network it was from an older neighborhood, and they have become undersized. And so the solution is they had to study the whole area, and they are doing phases where they go in and where they can enlarge the storm drainage to handle the situation. But it's done in phases, as Chris alluded to. It's very expensive, but it's not just in Winston-Salem.
Thank you for that context. All right,
We have our motion to adjourn, and happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you all for bearing with us on the longest meeting of the year.